Which is what if Naruto trained Konohamaru from the shadows after leaving Konoha. Part 1. His movements were jerky, automatic, hardly their usual robust standards. Items were picked up, considered and then either discarded or stuffed into the mission bag in front of him. Surprisingly, he didn't take the things he'd thought he would. Before becoming a genin he'd believed that he'd never be able to live without these little knickknacks and reminders of a life he now no longer wanted anything to do with. One thing he refused to leave behind, no matter how much of a reminder it was the slightly inflated green frog that served as his keeper of money. Besides, it was the only one he had and it was darn useful, even if it was slightly empty right now thanks to that stupid pervert. Satisfied that he'd assessed everything inside the little apartment, he snapped the bag closed and swung it onto his shoulders, shifting it slightly so that he could find a comfortable position. There was only one thing left to do. Reaching next to him he picked up the blue material with the shiny metal plate attached to the middle. Reaching into his pouch he pulled out a sharpened kunai. Raising it above the metal plate he paused, hesitated for the first time since reaching his decision. This was the one gift he treasured above everything else in his life, protected it like he would protect a precious person. After all, it had been a gift from his precious person. The first one to acknowledge his existence, really see him. But then those words, said by that very same precious person, burned through his mind once again and the kunai slashed before they'd even faded. Now instead of just a spiral leaf engraved into the metal plate, a straight and sure slash ran through it, deeper even than the leaf. It seemed fitting that way. That his pain caused by his village would be deeper than his loyalties to it. The headband was tied tightly in place, slashed leaf proudly displayed for all who might see it, which at this late hour none would. His eyes landed on a bright orange outfit, hanging with 3 others in the slightly open closet. No, not even that would come with him. He owned other clothes, he just didn't wear them as often. For more reasons than others had ever bothered to decipher, to care about enough to ask. With a nod of determined approval he swept his gaze over the surrounding area one last time before leaving out the door and closing it behind him with a soft click. There would be no one to stop him, no one begging him not to go, so he did not hurry. He wouldn't even be truly missed until 2 days from now. If he wasn't at training tomorrow, no one would know because he'd be training alone. As it was, he'd just been released from the hospital. He hadn't waited to see if those he'd fought so ferociously for had been healed. His heart had been in too much pain. Instead he'd pretended to be asleep when anyone came to see him and was far better at it than most would have thought. No, he wouldn't be missed. No one had even come to catch him in his lie of being asleep. They'd all been far too busy congratulating him. The only reason he'd be missed at all is because they'd be wondering why the hell he hadn't been in trouble yet, and they always got nervous if nothing happened for 2 days. Even then, it was only nervous. No one would actually check on him till 5 days of inactivity had passed. He knew it all too well. He'd tested those boundaries, just to see who'd come, if they'd come at all. Standing at the wide open gates, he stopped for a moment to take one last deep breath. After this there was no going back. Well, technically he had to get to the Land of Fire's border before there was truly no going back, but he'd made up his mind once and for all with the slash of his headband. He knew better than anyone what that slash would mean. He never went back on his word, so there was no going back now. I swear, on my ninja way. You will never reach your dreams. I'll be there to stop you every time you try. He whispered, no one around to hear him but himself. But he felt he needed to say this all the same, needed to promise it to someone, even if that was only himself. Because you stole mine from me. Then he disappeared into the darkness, hiding his tracks far better than anyone would ever give him credit for, which was half the reason he was leaving in the first place. Kakashi was still trying to wrap his head around the sight in front of him. The place looked like a hurricane had gone through it, yet at the same time it was an organized kind of chaos. Things weren't thrown across the room and sprawled on the floor in odd positions. No, things were neatly placed out of place. Like their owner had been looking for something and these items simply were not it. That, however, was not what troubled the Jonin sensei. If there was one thing that sent off warning bells in his head, it was the orange. Those nightmare-inducing, eyeball-burning orange outfits hanging in the closet. All 4 of them. Kakashi knew that the owner of said orange outfits only had 4 of them. He'd checked just to appease his own curiosity as to whether the boy wore the same clothes every day. He hadn't. He just had several of the same kind. He winced when he realized he didn't even know how long it had been since the place had been abandoned, and by the looks of things, that it had been. "Sensei. Is he in there?" a worried voice asked from behind him. Kakashi backed out of the place, a pale look on his face. He didn't know why, but he felt like he'd lost something special. It was completely silly. He wasn't even supposed to be here at all. He'd come because he'd wanted to get rid of a certain pink-haired student and her emo obsession. Apparently said emo obsession was in search of the once brightly clad teammate so that they could spar. Something about never getting a chance to see who was stronger in the Chunin exams, and perhaps something about settling a score. "No, he's not," Kakashi whispered. "That mission he was supposed to go on would have to wait. Come on, we have to go to the Hokage, now." Kakashi had grown uncharacteristically serious. Not even Sasuke protested with the usual glare. The 2 genin were forced to try desperately to keep up with the near-frantic pace their sensei set in his haste to get to the Hokage Tower. Not even bothering with the door, the silver-haired Jonin went straight to the window. The office itself was in complete disarray, the new Hokage still trying to get everything in order. "Kakashi, what are you doing here? I gave you a mission." Tsunade immediately barked in anger. "I know you haven't finished it yet since I just gave it to you. We have a bigger problem. Naruto's gone, and by the looks of things, he left willingly." Kakashi reported, much to the shock of his 2 teammates huffing slightly behind him. "But I can't be sure just exactly how long it's been." "What? Naruto's gone, and by the looks," Kakashi began to repeat, but Tsunade cut him off with a glare. "Shizune, get in here," the black-haired assistant squeaked in the other room before quickly hurrying into the Hokage's office with a quick "Yes ma'am." "Get all the available genin in my office now." Tsunade barked, and Shizune didn't even stick around long enough to utter a hi. "Kakashi, you are now the team leader of the Naruto retrieval team. This is a mission you can't afford to fail. You know the consequences if you do. What makes that loser so special?" Sasuke drawled and suddenly found himself on the receiving end of some heavy killer intent. Kakashi interrupted before the Hokage could maim the last Uchiha. "Because, despite what you think of the loud blonde idiot, in the wrong hands Naruto becomes a dangerous weapon, capable of destroying the Leaf Village, any hidden village." "Why would he leave?" Sakura's voice was very quiet, confused. She had never thought anything like this to come from her annoying teammate. If there was one thing she respected him for, it was his infallible loyalty to the village. "Never mind why. We have bigger problems than just the other hidden villages stumbling upon him. Don't forget about the Akatsuki." A new voice added gravely as the owner of the voice stepped through the same window as Kakashi had just moments ago. "Jiraiya," Tsunade greeted stiffly. "So Kakashi, not only do you have to not fail this mission for the sake of the village, but you have to complete this mission for Naruto's sake as well." Jiraiya summed up, causing the Jonin to slump slightly under the pressure. "I'll do my best, but I'm not working with the best," Kakashi replied and reminded, his tone dark. Naruto hid high in the trees, suppressing his chakra and not moving a muscle. Below him the familiar shock of silver hair announced the presence of his former sensei. He refused to think of the man as his sensei now. After all, rogue ninja did not have sensei. One thing he came to the conclusion of. His appearance would need to change more than his clothes. "Naruto, where are you?" Kakashi sighed, his head hanging down instead of looking up to the clouds, and as a consequence, missing the slight flash of a person moving at a high speed to another branch. The Naruto retrieval team had been foolproof in their planning. Kakashi had been satisfied that they would be able to find the missing blonde teammate before he even made it to the border, no matter when he had left, since there were only so many days he could have been missing in the first place. Shikamaru had concluded that Naruto had been traveling for 2.5 days now. He was sure of that. However, despite their planning and all their best efforts, they'd failed and no one was even sure how. This was Naruto after all. Neji, Sasuke and Hinata had proved useless with their blood limits, surprising the owners more than the rest of the team. Not even Kiba and Akamaru had managed to pick up a scent. Because of this, Kiba was adamant that Naruto was either still in the village or he'd simply disappeared in a puff of smoke. Shino was silently agreeing with him because his bugs couldn't find anything either. So who wants to tell Tsunade that we've failed? Kakashi asked. I suggest we draw sticks. Neji suggested, and no one had anything better to offer. No one wanted to go home, but it had been a whole week now and they'd still found nothing. Not even the Anbu backup had found anything. Just where had Naruto gone and why could no one find him? Chapter 1 * roughly 4 years later. I can't believe we got another boring mission. Konohamaru pouted. Just shut up and be thankful that you have one at all. Ebisu-sensei scolded. It was an age-old argument, one that was quickly becoming old. Secretly he had to agree with the teen. Yes, these missions were boring, and yes, he'd have liked something a little higher up in rank, but these kinds of missions were all that was left. Those teams usually scooped up and completed missions before the other shinobi even got a chance to know about them. There weren't anything higher than D rank and the boring C rank left. So Konohamaru should know better than to complain. It wasn't like they could do anything about it in the first place. I know, but I still don't see why we have to look for a stupid teapot. That's not a mission. That's an insult to ninja. Konohamaru yelled, his voice betraying the true extent of his emotions. He was truly upset that the only missions they ever got were akin to being messengers or delivery ninja. He believed that it wasn't a true test of a ninja's skills, and he was right. At this rate, none of the newer teams would ever progress. Ebisu was actually contemplating brining the matter up with the Hokage. The only cool part about this entire mission is that it's miles and miles and miles away from Konoha. If it hadn't been for this mission, I'd think we'd never leave the village. It's a good thing this darn teapot was so far. Moegi muttered. Ebisu sighed. When Moegi was starting to agree with Konohamaru, the situation was getting dire. They had to find the teapot, and fast. Ebisu was now decided. He and the Hokage were going to have a heart-to-heart. You know, if my calculations are correct, the next shop should be the one we're looking for. It's the 11th tea shop in the whole city out of 13. Udon announced with a sniff that made his teammates cringe. It better be. This whole hunting for a teapot that likely didn't exist was dead boring. Soon Konohamaru was going to lose his patience and start something, and naturally Udon and Moegi would follow, completely ignoring Ebisu. He hated it when that happened because he was always expected to explain to the Hokage why he couldn't control his team. Ebisu couldn't very well tell the Hokage to try teaching the brat Konohamaru herself. He was too proud to do that. Instead, he had to endure the brat, who had replaced his usual green-blue scarf with something a little more irritating. Bright fluorescent orange. He'd also gone from being slightly like the now missing shinobi, to being exactly like the missing shinobi. How was one poor sensei supposed to keep up with that? Walking into the antique tea shop, the four shinobi were careful not to bump over any of the displays in the cramped little shop. Once again the three genin waited around while Ebisu spoke to the aging shopkeeper, who shook their head and muttered the same thing that they'd heard all week. They'd neither seen nor heard of the teapot that the four shinobi were hunting for. That's it. Konohamaru exploded as they exited the shop. I'm thirsty and Ebisu-sensei is buying us drinks. He proclaimed before promptly marching into an establishment across the road before the spluttering sensei could stop him. Wait. Ebisu called, hurrying to catch up to his genin team. They ignored him as always and went right on in. Oh no. Hey, Grandpa. I want a soda. Konohamaru demanded loudly when he walked right up to the bar. He either hadn't noticed the room's occupants or he was ignoring them. Udon and Moegi sure had and were currently sticking very close to each other as they followed Konohamaru. All the people in the little restaurant of sorts looked like they'd be more than happy to kill the genin just to hear them scream, and they looked like they could, no matter that they were ninja. Something about them said that they could either way. Almost all of them had some sort of weapon. You know, kid, you're awfully small to be making such loudmouth demands. The old man behind the counter commented, looking at Konohamaru through one squinted eye. His other eye appeared to be missing, leaving nothing more than an empty socket covered by an eyelid. I'm not a kid. I'm a ninja, believe it. Konohamaru replied hotly. The 13-year-old did not take well to being called young, even though he really was. A ninja are you? Hey, how honored I feel. What brings you three to my humble little restaurant? Nothing. They were just leaving, Ebisu stated forcefully, grabbing Konohamaru's scarf and dragging the spluttering boy back towards the door only to find it blocked by a panting human mountain. Ebisu looked the guy up and down, his glasses sliding off his nose to show eyes so wide you could see the whites all round. Wow, his mom sure made him eat all his vegetables. Moegi muttered much to Udon's agreement. The statement caused the human behemoth to look at them, his face turning to a scowl. So there's more of you leave shits in here I thought I lost you. No matter, there's nowhere for you to run in here. He growled with a sadistic gleam in his feral eyes. No, see here sir, you've got this all wrong. Ebisu's little speech never got finished. A large meaty fist seemed to dislike his lectures as much as his genin did since it soundly clocked him one, sending him straight into the wall with a loud crack. Sensei. Udon and Moegi yelled together. Oh man, how embarrassing. Konohamaru whined. That's supposed to be out sensei. So who's next? I think the loud-mouthed punk perhaps. The giant focused his gaze on the stunned Konohamaru. As loud as he wasn't stupid. He knew when he'd met his match, and while he didn't respect his sensei, he did respect the man's rank. He was a special jonin, and if one punch was enough to knock him out, then what chance did he, a lowly genin with no true experience, have against this guy? A large hand grabbed his bright orange scarf and lifted him from the floor, bringing Konohamaru up to eye level. A sense of déjà vu swept over Konohamaru as a similar situation flashed through his mind, on that featured a painted face and a scary red head. Only in that situation a certain loud-mouthed blonde had been there to help. He didn't have that same luxury this time. Konohamaru. Moegi gasped in fear and concern, let him go. But she was too scared to actually move. Put me down, ugly. I'm not a toy. Konohamaru yelled with more bravado than what he was feeling. He couldn't yell his outrage again as a large hand smacked him across the face. His vision swam as that one casual slap to his face very nearly was enough to make him pass out. What was that brat? I'm afraid I can't hear you. The behemoth mocked, shaking the dazed boy like a doll. Udon. Do something. Moegi squeaked, hands close to her mouth as she watched in horror. Me. What do you want me to do? Udon stuttered, and he was right. They didn't actually know any jutsus other than the sexy jutsu and the academy standard jutsus. Their brief and hardly private exchange was met with rowdy laughter from the other people in the little bar. Ebisu groaned some, but otherwise he was still out for the count. Ironically, the ridiculous sensei was their only hope, and here he was sleeping on the job. You know, I'm not really opposed to killing a kid or two, but I do dislike torturing them. A quiet voice stated from the shadows, but the other people stopped laughing immediately. Apparently this person garnered some sort of respect in this place. Moegi and Udon turned their gazes to his shadowy corner with a slight sense of hope. Perhaps this stranger would be their savior. I'm not going down without a fight. Konohamaru chose that moment to recollect his bearings. His small hands come together in a seal that the two genin recognized and paled. Sexy no jutsu. Konohamaru yelled. A large puff of smoke obscured their view for a moment, hardly dispersing, only moving out the way to reveal the curvy brunette that was Konohamaru's version of the perfect woman. She blew a kiss at the stunned giant man and giggled before puffing back into the form of Konohamaru and yelling. Run. Tactical retreat. Tactical retreat. He was making a mad dash to the door when he was jerked to a halt as someone grabbed a hold of his longer-than-average scarf. Konohamaru knew he had to either ditch the scarf or lose his chance at escape, but he just couldn't bring himself to ditch the bright orange reminder. Now where you going in such a hurry? That was quite the show you put on there, kid. A voice leered at him. Lemme go, you pervert. The door banged open and the bartender decided that too much was happening way too fast. How was a one-eyed old man supposed to keep up? There you are. Did you think you could get away from me? One arrogant Sasuke Uchiha yelled, pointing a finger at the large growling man from earlier. Everyone in the room froze, except for Konohamaru, who was kicking and struggling with all his might. Sasuke's distraction was all he needed to break free. Instead of running for the door, he ran to Ebisu, shaking the older shinobi. Come on, you closet pervert. You gotta wake up and get me out of here. I'm too young to die. I still need to become Hokage. Ebisu just groaned but didn't wake up. Turning back to see what was happening, Konohamaru took note that Udon and Moegi had very discreetly shuffled their way to an out-of-the-way place in the shadows. Sasuke had now been joined by his other teammates, Kakashi Hatake and Sakura Haruno, completing the highly reputed and feared but incomplete Team 7. Instead of cowering in fear, the large man began to laugh. Wiping tears from his eyes, he looked at the determined Leaf Ninja before stating, "You lose. This is a trap." With those words, the doors slammed shut and a seal glowed into activation. The entire building was enclosed in a barrier. There was no escaping it till the barrier was broken, and with the crowded occupants all having similar looks of glee on their faces, there wasn't going to be time to dismantle the barrier for a while yet. Sakura, stay out of the way and protect Ebisu and his team. Kakashi stated in a low, cautious voice. Nah, you stick with your team. I got the brats, a cheerful voice said from the back. It was the same voice that had interrupted earlier. Only this time he moved out of the shadows and into view. I'm not part of this little setup. The phrase, wrong place in the wrong time, comes to mind. He continued, placing a hand on Moegi and Udon's shoulder so that he could steer them towards Konohamaru. Nothing of his face could be seen since he wore a mask, just like Kakashi's, and a pair of shades covered his eyes, reminding them of an aburame. A large, deep hood covered his head, casting his features into shadows, only further adding to the difficulty of seeing his features. That hoodie was a royal blue in color, while his pants were the standard baggy shinobi kind, blacker than a shadow and also slightly thicker in material. Perhaps denim, which was a really expensive material. His shoes were like shinobi sandals, only they were a deep brown and completely closed with neither openings by the toes or the heels. How do we know we can trust you? Sasuke demanded. If I wanted to kill them, they'd be dead already. While this is hardly insurance, it's also a fact. Besides, it's a waste of energy. The mysterious person answered. So far they couldn't even tell if he was a shinobi. He did have a tanto and weapons pouches, but any civilian could look the part of a shinobi. The difference was in the chakra and the fighting skills. The decision was taken out of their hands when Team 7 was suddenly attacked from all sides. All they could do was trust this stranger to do what he said he would and protect the 4 other Leaf Shinobi who were not supposed to be there. Who are you? Konohamaru asked as the stranger got closer, practically carrying the other 2 genin out of the fight. Nobody. But I do like that jutsu of yours. Creative. The stranger replied in a cheerful tone, ducking a kunai at the same time. The stranger ignored the sounds of battle around him as he checked on the genin sensei. Ebisu appeared to be completely fine other than a concussion. He was probably going to have a major headache for a while. For the most part the 5 of them were ignored as the rest of the room, who turned out to be disguised Missing Nin and Rouge Ninja, were focused more on Team 7. Man, just look at them go. Konohamaru sighed, obvious envy and respect in his tone. And indeed they were impressive. However, the enclosed spaces were taking its toll. They couldn't use any jutsu, only taijutsu and close combat with kunai and shuriken. Forget about them. Start worrying about yourself. A voice snarled from their right. One of the ninja had taken advantage of Team 7's distraction and chosen to go after the other genin. A Leaf Shinobi was still a Leaf Shinobi. He had no qualms either way. As long as he got to take some of them down, then he was happy. However, he was blocked by the stranger that had interfered. No matter. They had all agreed to spare him with nothing more than a few broken bones, but now he was as good as one of them and therefore as good as dead. That plan was cut short prematurely, literally. Blood pooled on the floor as it wept from the ninja's slit throat. Ebisu's genin team gaped in open-mouthed shock at the lifeless ninja on the floor and the one standing above him. They hadn't even seen him move. He had to be a ninja, but where did his loyalties lie? I suggest you lot step it up a pace. At this rate they're going to win. The unknown shinobi said loudly towards the battling Team 7. He received a snarl from Sasuke in reply. These ninja weren't particularly powerful. They were just plentiful and apparently specialized in short distance, no jutsu combat. Without realizing it, Sakura found herself backed into a corner, unable to build up the momentum she needed to get a really good punch in. Her attacks were based on heavy hitting, coming at you straight on. She was the medic. It was her job to dodge as Tsunade had drilled into her. Yet she didn't only know how to fight using that strength, no, she knew other methods, she just wasn't skilled in them as much. Which was why she found that she couldn't stop the 3 attacks coming straight for her. She could stop 1, maybe 2, but not all 3, and they were all aimed for lethal points. Both Kakashi and Sasuke were too busy to even find her, much less help her. She was on her own. Thinking quickly, Sakura chose the 2 that were most likely to kill her immediately, went to aim for those first. But she found that she didn't need to block anything as gloved hands slammed onto the wall on either side of her head, enclosing her, protecting her. Shaded eyes were on her face as that mysterious ninja who'd proclaimed responsibility for Ebisu's team took all 3 attacks in the back. Need to keep up their hot stuff. You're going to die if you don't step it up a level or 2. His tone was clearly amused, and those words were all the warning she got before the shinobi disappeared in a puff of smoke, her 3 attackers lying on the floor, their own blood quickly pooling around them. A shadow clone, huh? She hadn't seen one of those in years. Looking across the room, she saw that the shinobi was engaged on the other side, doing as he'd said and protecting the 3 genin and their unconscious sensei. His speed was unreal. He was literally playing with his opponents, messing around with them before delivering a swift death via a slit throat. She didn't have a lot of time to admire the almost assassin-like precision of the unknown ninja. More enemies quickly replaced the ones he had killed. Just how many were there? There was no way this place could have held that many ninja in it. They had to end sometime. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. The yell was enough to make Team 7 freeze. The room was suddenly overrun by copies of the mysterious ninja. Soon Kakashi, Sasuke and Sakura found themselves staring at the blank eyes of the now dead ninja. I got tired of them summoning more of the others into the room. The mysterious nin explained with a shrug, stepping over the bodies so that he could get to the door. Who are you? Sasuke demanded. Nobody, came the immediate and frosty reply. In an instant he'd switched from a happy-go-lucky, glad to help ninja to an extremely cold and impatient one. They had to be careful. Do you serve a village? Kakashi asked, his tone light but his stance on guard as he watched this unknown ninja study the barrier seal on the door. He already knew how to break it, but he wanted to see what this one would do. No. The tone was just as pleasant as before he was asked who he was. So that was a non-touchable topic. I travel around a lot. Gotta say though, it's been a while since I've seen Konoha ninja. Sakura moved to check on the genin and found that not even a drop of blood had landed on them. Their sensei even had signs of beginner-level healing. She glanced at the ninja still studying the door. Was he an amateur medic? Perhaps his travels prevented him from fully devoting himself to the study. She herself knew that it took a hell of a lot of practice. Do you have a name? Sasuke asked, well sneered, or do you prefer nobody? His question didn't even get an answer. Instead, one chakra-coated hand slammed against the center of the seal, causing the barrier to ripple. That wasn't what Kakashi would have done, but effective nonetheless. He simply overloaded the seal with more chakra than what it had been programmed to hold, since the person who's placed it there probably didn't have all that much chakra. The barrier disappeared and the mysterious ninja opened the door. He stopped for a moment to look back at Konohamaru and said, that teapot you're looking for is in the very last store at the end of this city. Don't bother looking in the others. Try not to break it, nay, it's the only one in existence. Then he was walking away. Well, that was odd, but I'm not complaining. Sakura sighed, brushing her hair away from her face. I still want to know who the hell he is. Sasuke growled. Either way, we should start heading back. Our mission is now complete. Kakashi noted before pulling out a familiar orange book. Sensei, have you seen this? Udon asked, coming over to the table that Ebisu and Moegi were already seated at. They'd rented 2 rooms for the night since Ebisu still had a headache after Sakura healed his concussion. All 3 genin had been strangely quiet, but Ebisu hadn't thought anything odd by it. After all, they'd just witnessed a massacre. Ebisu himself felt more foolish than he'd ever felt in his entire life. He's been knocked out, leaving his genin completely defenseless in an unknown city with a bunch of questionable individuals who had turned out to be rogue ninja out for Konoha blood. Worse yet, Team 7 had seen it all and had to bail them out. His only comfort was the fact that Team 7 had been bailed out by a single unknown shinobi. Udon was now waving a piece of paper at his sensei, demanding his attention, and Ebisu took the offered paper. Scrawled across it rather hastily were the words, "Heading back to Konoha on my own. I need to train more. I'll never catch up to Team 7 looking for a stupid teapot. Konohamaru. P.S. I hope you're feeling better when you read this, Ebisu-sensei. Take it easy, you hit your head really hard." They'd found the teapot exactly where the unknown shinobi had said it would be, and Moegi treated it like it was a diamond. No one complained, because if that thing broke, there went their whole mission. I'm going to kill him. Ebisu growled, getting to his feet. Get your things, we're leaving. He added over his shoulder to the 2 unsure genin, who nodded and raced off to get their things. Ebisu was mentally kicking himself. How hadn't they noticed the lack of a person in Konohamaru's bed? Oh, right, been trying to be nice by sneaking out without waking them. How had Konohamaru snuck past him? His head injury had made him far more tired than usual, that's how. With a sigh, he paid their bill and stood outside waiting for the remainder of his team. The pace back home was going to be hellish so that they could catch the little bastard. It would be good training for Udon and Moegi, who really needed to work on their stamina. The 3 shinobi set out immediately, Moegi still careful of the teapot she had designated to carry the way home. Sasuke paused on his tree branch, cocking his head to the side. He held up a hand to signal to his teammates to stop, which they did so immediately. They each took turns being team leader, and this mission was his turn. It had been a long time since Kakashi had been the undisputed leader of Team 7, and he personally didn't mind. Tsunade, however, wasn't informed of this little arrangement. Mission reports were always doctors, so that the roles on the paper were not what the roles on the mission had been. They actually wrote those reports together, huddled over Kakashi's small table and joking about the way they were writing it, all the while being extremely careful. After all, they had to be truthful since lying was an offense, yet they had to be secretive if they wanted to continue doing missions their way. If the Chunin that checked their reports, though it was strange that Kakashi had such varying leadership tactics, they never said anything. They probably thought it was normal for the Jonin. Now they were waiting, since Sasuke had clearly sensed something. Kakashi let him have the role of leader, not stepping in even though he'd already sensed the problem himself. He was surprised at Sasuke's reaction time. He was getting quicker and quicker. A harried-looking Ebisu burst through the trees, not at all being cautious about his path. He didn't check for traps or ambushes first, and didn't bother to hide his presence very well either. What kind of a shinobi was he? Oh, Team 7. Didn't think we'd catch up to you. Ebisu stated, his tone conveying his bland enthusiasm at seeing Team 7 twice in as many days. They did not get along. In fact, there were a special select few that could stand to be around Team 7 longer than was necessary. They were something else. We weren't really in a hurry. Sakura replied, noticing the 2 genin struggling to catch up to them, panting heavily. How are you feeling today? You look a bit disheveled. Lose something? Sasuke droned, his eyes trained on the 2 approaching genin. Me? Oh, I'm perfectly alright, thank you. It's a certain genin that's not going to be fine as soon as I catch up to him. In fact, after I'm done killing him, I'll be more than fine. I'll be perfect cause then all my troubles will dissolve into wherever I hide his body. Ebisu's crackle sounded a little on the insane side, causing Kakashi to raise an eyebrow. Unfortunately he knew the feeling. You haven't by any chance seen Konohamaru, have you? Udon panted as he landed on a branch. The poor boy looked ready to faint. Konohamaru must have really pissed Ebisu off to make him forget about his students' lack of chakra at their current age. It looked like he'd been pushing them for a while already and hard. No, we haven't, Kakashi answered, which only seemed to anger Ebisu more. When I get a hold of him, he's so dead. Ebisu promised under his breath. What did he do? Sasuke drawled. In reply Ebisu shoved a piece of paper practically up his nose, causing him to glare at the shinobi. He snatched the paper away from Ebisu if only to get it out of such close proximity to his face. When he read the words however, he frowned. That's not right. If what's written on here is true then we should have encountered the genin a while back, unless you guys somehow managed to miss him with your reckless pace. Sasuke commented while doing the mental calculations. Unless the loser just got lost. Knowing Konohamaru he probably did. Moegi muttered. Kakashi sighed before scratching the side of his head. Well, do you have anything that's his? He asked, to which the genin and their sensei shook their heads. They wouldn't have thought they'd need something of their fellow genin teammates so that they could track him should he decide to run off. Then we have two choices, fan out and look for him, which could take forever and is a waste of my time, or we could head back to Konoha and see if he somehow managed to bypass us and get there first. Sasuke concluded, his voice showing his enthusiasm, or lack of when it came to the first option and his doubtfulness of the second option being plausible. After a brief moment of consideration and discussion it was decided that they'd head back to Konoha, since that was apparently where Konohamaru was headed in the first place. Team 7 had raised questions and pointed out scenarios that pointed to a possible kidnapping, but Team Ebisu was adamant that Konohamaru left of his own accord. So with the thought of home in mind the two teams left for Konoha, Team Ebisu at a thankfully slower pace and Team 7 at a faster one. Finding the other shinobi's trail had been easier than he'd thought. He wondered if that was because he wasn't trying to hit it or because he wasn't as skilled as Konohamaru had originally thought. He hoped it was the first, otherwise this was a waste of time and he would get into trouble for nothing. He wasn't stupid, no matter how much he pretended he was. He knew that what he was doing was practically called desertion and he could be labeled a mission nin for it, but he also knew that they'd incorrectly assume he was stupid, like he wanted them to believe, and that he'd gotten lost on the way back. But right now he had other things in mind. He had a goal and nothing was going to stop him from achieving that goal. If the Hokage would allow him to progress as a ninja, then he'd find someone who would. He'd find a teacher that would help him achieve his goal, not ignore it like Tsunade did. He didn't bother honoring her with a title. She didn't deserve it. So with these thoughts in mind, he stuck to the trees, following, watching. The ninja from the day before was walking along the road, not at all concerned about attacks or just too deep in thought to look out for any. Konohamaru wondered if he'd be successful in an attack. Probably not, and not the best first impression he'd made, so he stuck to the branches. He was so engrossed in his task that he didn't sense the other ninja in the tress till it was too late. Too late as in one of them covered his mouth and dragged him backwards. Just because his mouth was covered didn't mean he was going to go quietly. Konohamaru kicked and struggled to get out the grasp of the ninja who held him. He wasn't a friend and was most likely going to kill Konohamaru if he didn't say something about it. Taking an opportunity, Konohamaru bit down on the hand over his mouth, causing the ninja to let him go and curse. Konohamaru didn't waste time. He made a chakra-infused dash towards the last place he'd seen the mysterious shinobi. He'd protected Konohamaru and his team once, would he do it again? Breaking through the trees, Konohamaru fell to the floor and ungracefully landed on his butt with an oath. Looking up, he saw that the other shinobi was already engaged in battle, fighting off the ninja with an ease that frustrated the enemy. A set of arms grabbed Konohamaru from behind and the genin immediately began struggling. "Hey, calm down. It's me," a disgruntled yet familiar voice scolded. Konohamaru immediately stopped struggling. "You shouldn't be here. The clone of the mysterious shinobi stated as he took Konohamaru away from the immediate battle. I wanted to find you. Konohamaru replied with a pout. Great, you found me. Now what? The clone's voice had a distinctly mocking tone to it. Konohamaru hesitated before he answered. He wasn't sure how. This had all seemed so much easier in his head. For a brief moment rejection entered his mind, but he pushed it away, refusing to even consider it a possibility. He was saved from immediately answering by the arrival of more enemies. Konohamaru had never been so indirectly attacked before in his life. Yet this was the life of a true ninja, not the baby missions they kept getting. He wisely stayed out of the way as he watched a clone fight just as well as the original would, even taking hits that would normally dispel a normal shadow clone. He was fast. So fast sometimes that Konohamaru couldn't even see him move, but something had happened, so he had to assume that he did. He didn't even use a single jutsu. Konohamaru knew the battle was over when the original burst into their small clearing and killed the last of the enemy while his clone finished with his opponent before disappearing in a puff of smoke. So, what do you want? I want you to teach me. Konohamaru stated as bravely as he could. He knew that this ninja didn't have to protect him. He also knew that this ninja could easily demand payment in return for having protected him twice. Most ninja didn't go out of their way for nothing. No. The answer was immediate, without thought nor consideration. Why? Konohamaru childishly demanded. I don't have time to teach Pipsqueak one-up ninja. In case you haven't noticed, I'm not exactly the safest person to hang around with. You should just go home, kid, while you still have one that wants you. Please, I need to get stronger so that I can reach my goal, and I can't do that in Konoha. He knew he sounded desperate and childish, but he didn't care. He needed this ninja to teach him. Hey, I thought Konoha was producing top-class ninja at the moment. What makes you any different? I'm sure if you have a little patience, then the progress will start to show. The unknown ninja was now waving his hand dismissively, almost turning around so that he could leave. It's complicated. Back home, only 4 teams are acknowledged while the rest of us are ignored. They're called the Rookie 9 and Team Guy. All the training efforts are focused on those 4 teams. All the missions go to them as well. I've been a genin for nearly 2 years now, and I only know the academy jutsus and the jutsu I used at the bar yesterday. I've never been on a mission higher than AD rank. My sensei, Ebisu, he tries, but we never get time to do any real training because they keep giving us these lame D rank missions that take up all our time, like looking for a non-existent teapot. Konohamaru explained in a rush, his anger at his situation leaking into his voice as he clenched his fists. I don't know why, but it's like they've forgotten that other teams need to progress too. Without those 4 teams, Konoha will fall. It's weak and lazy and no one seems to notice or care. But I do. Konohamaru's voice changed to depressed, soft. You know, kid, telling me that is akin to telling me village secrets. I could use the information you just gave me to bring down your entire village. Konohamaru's head jerked up so quickly his almost damaged something, his expression the very definition of horror. Don't worry though. I've no interest in Konoha. However, if what you say is true, then Konoha has changed from the village I knew it to be. The relief at these words were all too visible on the young genin's face. It is different. Ever since he disappeared, things have changed. That's why I want you to teach me. If I go back to the village, I'll never get strong enough to achieve my goal. Konohamaru murmured sadly. He knew that if his grandfather were still alive, he'd weep in despair at the state of his beloved village. On the outside they were still as powerful as ever, but on the inside they were falling apart, and it was only a matter of time before someone else figured it out. Konohamaru had to be strong for that. He had to defend his village. Your goals, nay. What are your goals? To become the strongest ninja. There was that mocking tone again. Konohamaru squared his shoulders and looked the unknown ninja straight in the eye, his gaze determined. To get strong so that I can protect those precious to me, so that what happened to my brother never happens to anyone else, and so that I can find my brother. His statement was met with silent consideration as his words were analyzed. Konohamaru almost held his breath as he waited for an answer. Tell me something, kid, what will you do if, When you return to Konoha, they won't accept you back. Right now, you can still redeem yourself, say you got lost and the most you'll get is a slap on the wrist. No, I won't give up now. I'm not going back on my word. If they won't let me come back, then I will find my brother first and protect Konoha second, even if they don't know that I am. Konohamaru replied without hesitation. This seemed to be the answer that was desired. A tension that had been building without Konohamaru realizing it suddenly lifted. When you're not calling me sensei, you can call me Nin. It's short for ninja. I'm not giving you my real name and I'm not babysitting you forever, kid. I'll train you for 6 months and exactly 6 months. It's up to you how much you learn in that time. I just hope for your sake that your village doesn't send hunter nins to find you because that means they consider you a missing nin. They were almost to the village now and they'd seen no sign that Konohamaru had even stopped to camp for the night. He couldn't have gone straight through. It would have been impossible since the city they had gone to was a week's worth of traveling from Konoha. The brat wouldn't have been able to pull it off. Sasuke frowned when he considered the possibility that they'd misjudged in their decision not to go look for Konohamaru in the city. It was too late now. The trail he'd taken would no longer be traceable. Team 7 didn't voice their opinions out loud since Team Ebisu were happily making plans of what to do when they found the boy and they seemed to be in two minds about it. Those plans ranged from squeezing the life out of him with the power of a relieved hug or to simply squeeze the life out of him with the power of throttling hands. Sasuke was leaning towards the latter while Sakura was leaning towards the first. The boy's disappearance was troublesome, to say the least. How could one genin get so hopelessly lost? Surely he could ask for directions. When the gates to the village came into view, Team Ebisu got more vocal while Team 7 grew more somber. Kakashi dashed ahead, speaking quietly to Katetsu and Izumo, whose happy greeting died only to be resurrected as grim seriousness. Both looked at each other as their eyes glazed over in thoughtfulness. Then both shook their heads. Team Ebisu and the remainder of Team 7 landed next to Kakashi, who sighed and turned to them. Looks like we're going to go see the Hokage. Team 7 were ordered to go back to the city and fence Konohamaru. The three inwardly groaned but didn't say a word of protest. The Hokage was far too furious. They did feel sorry for Ebisu. The poor special Jonin got reamed. When he tried to splutter out that he'd been injured, the Hokage only threatened him with demotion. Eventually the poor spluttering shinobi wisely shut up while Tsunade had her way with him. Needless to say, Team 7 knew that going back to the city would be useless. It had taken a week to get to Konoha and it would take another week, maybe half, if they really pushed it to reach the city again. By the time they got there, any trail left by the genin would be cold and they'd have to search the hard way. Now if Konohamaru had done what Kakashi suspected he had, then he knew they'd never find the boy unless he chose to let them find him. But orders were orders. Before they left, Kakashi paid a visit to the torture and interrogation head, Ibiki. He wanted to know what the man knew about a certain unknown shinobi with no loyalties to any village. After visiting Ibiki, he deterred to find Jiraiya, who after Naruto's disappearance, remained in Konoha. Between Tsunade and Jiraiya they both made decisions where the village was concerned and basically ran the place together. Every shinobi in Konoha knew that an order from Jiraiya was the equivalent to an order from the Hokage, and as such anything he wanted he got. Trusting in the two shinobis' skills to uncover anything on the lone ninja, Team 7 headed back to the city in what they knew was essentially a wild goose chase. Konohamaru was not going to be found. It was late at night, the moon in the sky hidden behind clouds. The ninja was perched on a branch, ready and waiting for his chance. If one looked where he was, they would not see him. His mission was stealth tonight, and being caught before he allowed himself to be would be disastrous. He had a mission tonight and he absolutely could not fail it. Sensei. The hidden leaf is really weak at the moment, right? So how do I make them see that? His own question to his sensei flashed through his mind as he took in the lack of guards. Well, that's easy. You teach them a lesson in humility by exploiting those very weaknesses. Nin had grinned back at him. The other had waited exactly 4 months before he'd revealed something as small as his eyes to Konohamaru. They were a light chestnut color that held a lot more emotion than his voice. It was like he could train his voice to never betray a thing, but he couldn't keep his eyes from sparkling with excitement or from squeezing shut as he grinned under his mask. It was the only true way of knowing what was going through the other shinobi's head, if one knew what to look for. And tonight, Konohamaru, 13-year-old genin of 2.5 years, was going to teach the great and mighty village hidden in the leaves a lesson he hoped they never forgot. Dashing from his hiding place, Konohamaru went straight for the Hokage's tower. All the best secrets were kept there, but that was not his target, only his distraction. By the time they realized it, it would be far too late. Dashing from rooftop to rooftop, he didn't even have to pause. The lack of security was almost sickening. He'd slept peacefully in this very village his whole life bar 6 months and 1 week, that 1 week spent looking for a stupid teapot, and he'd believed that he'd been perfectly safe behind those walls. Now, as a ninja breaking in, he realized how naive he'd been. Sticking close to the shadows all the same, since his sensei had drilled into him that bad habits got ninja killed, he waited before proceeding anywhere near the tower. He frowned when he noticed that the light was still on in the Hokage's office. Well, that certainly saved some time. He originally hadn't known where Tsunade lived. Every Hokage was different since it was a safety procedure. He remembered as a child that visiting his grandfather had always been a tedious thing unless he went to the place the third Hokage was sure to be, like the mission room or his office. If that light meant the Hokage was still at the office, then he didn't have to waste the chakra needed to create a sufficient diversion. He'd only have to use a single jutsu, but that jutsu was a costly one. For one thing, he still had to iron out a few kinks, and for another, it was a high-level jutsu, probably higher than S rank, which would probably cause it land smack bang in the Forbidden Scrolls. It was a Nin Sensei original and Konohamaru had permission to use it. The honor was almost overwhelming. As the man's student, he knew how intensely guarded the man was about his identity and anything that would lead to it. So that meant anything that was his alone. They both knew that by giving Konohamaru permission to use the jutsu, by teaching it to him at all, and should he ever have a need to use it, it was like giving the technique to the hidden leaf. Konohamaru hadn't questioned his sensei when he'd been told that he would be learning the technique. He could see the strain in Nin's body as he spoke about it, so he'd wisely kept shut and simply learned. It had taken him precious time to learn not to argue with Nin about something. If Nin said do it, he did it, but it hadn't always been that way, and thinking back on it now, he realized what a huge mistake that had been. After all, 6 months was hardly any time at all. He would have had time to learn so much more if he'd actually stopped being so stubborn in the beginning. And Nin had known a lot. The ninja was skilled in almost every area imaginable, aside from genjutsu. He said he just didn't have the delicate chakra control needed, and as such his medical ninjutsu was just as rudimentary. Nevertheless, Nin knew something of everything. When Konohamaru had asked him why, Nin had explained that he'd struggled to find things that he was truly good at. He'd wanted to get as strong as he could so that he could achieve his own goals, and since he knew his opponent would be just as strong if not stronger, he had to find something he truly excelled at. So to find it, he'd tried his hand at everything, and because he was just such a stubborn, thick-headed fool, sometimes he didn't give up on anything until he'd mastered it to the best of his ability. It was a rare moment of disclosure, and it hadn't lasted long. The second Nin realized that he was actually giving away something about himself. Even something as mundane as his favorite techniques, he'd clammed up and been short off with Konohamaru for a whole week. Nin had a surprisingly sunny disposition for such an efficient killer, so a week of being grumpy was a very long time. Konohamaru hadn't been pushed so hard in his life as he had in that week, but he'd learned a hell of a lot faster. Nin also liked stealth and speed more than stealth. His mantra on this matter was simple and rather logical. It didn't matter how strong your opponent was, if they couldn't touch you, they couldn't beat you. To Nin, speed and stealth went hand in hand. He knew that if you were too slow to get to the next hiding spot, you were as good as dead or discovered, which in his mind for some reason was worse. Konohamaru had been drilled in the ways of speed, and due to Nin's own highly private nature, deception. Konohamaru would never, ever, disrespect the usefulness of the henge. Nin had showed him things he'd never even dreamed of using such a simple technique for. Of course, as with all things Nin did, his insane chakra levels allowed him to take everything a step higher. His transformations weren't just illusions, they were real. He could turn into anything as well as choose between really being it or keeping it simple and making it an illusion. Being the real thing always took more chakra, but that wasn't a problem for Nin. All through the 6 months Nin had also focused on Konohamaru's chakra reserves, fed up with him collapsing from exhaustion before they'd truly started anything strenuous. In his mind, water walking and tree walking were baby exercises in comparison. Nin wholeheartedly told Konohamaru that chakra control exercises were perfect for developing one's chakra network and by extension their reserves, and since Konohamaru was still young his networks would be easier to mold and extend. Konohamaru had muttered rather darkly at the time that he wished Nin would take his exercises and shove them up his royal ass. He had a perfectly good reason for being so snappy at that moment in time. Nin was making him dodge high-speed kunai while on a rushing stream that ended in a fatal plummet to the ground below known as a waterfall, as well as being forced to keep several hundred leaves plastered to his body with chakra. After he'd mastered the training, he'd become a master at chakra control and dared anyone to find anyone better. He was pretty sure he could outdo a Hyuga. With a disappointed sigh Konohamaru casually walked up the side of the building. It was a warm night and the Hokage had left a window open to allow a breeze to filter into the office. Yet even with the breeze it was the flickering of the candle that alerted the Hokage to the presence behind her, before the kunai at her throat. "What do you want?" Tsunade asked in a low and calm voice which was met with a small chuckle. "Just for you to know how easy it would be for me to kill you. I didn't even meet in single guard. I'd even had a distraction already." A clearly disguised voice informed her cheerfully. "If you don't intend to kill me, then would you mind lowering the kunai?" Tsunade countered, still in the low and level tone. "Oh, I don't think I'll do that. This kunai is the only thing keeping you from misbehaving. I want to talk to you and the arrival of Anbu would seriously impede my efforts, and not to mention that infamous temper of yours." Misbehaving? The question was snorted as though he'd offended the Hokage. Probably had, but he didn't care so much. "Well, would you care for a drink?" Tsunade offered, seeming to come to terms with the pointy and sharp object by her neck. "No thanks. I'm too young for that just yet." Konohamaru replied automatically, but immediately mentally cursed. He'd already given away something vital. Too young. I find that hard to believe. To have the skill to get this far you have to be at least old enough to drink. Tsunade stated her disbelief. Konohamaru sighed. He may be young, but the third was his grandfather and he hadn't disappointed when it had come to showing his family heritage. Even Nin had been impressed. "My real age will give you a heart attack if that is what you truly believe, and the ridiculously easy task of getting this far is what I wanted to talk to you about. The village hidden in the leaves has fallen very far ever since the third was murdered by the snake." Konohamaru started, his voice hissing out the word snake angrily. "I see you garner no love for the traitor either. That gives you a few points in my book," Tsunade observed. "However, I must disagree with your statement about the village. The village hidden in the leaves has never held a stronger position amongst the other villages since its creation. That is where you're wrong. Remove Team 7, just Team 7, and how long will the others last?" Konohamaru asked slowly, giving the fifth Hokage time to think it over. "I have faith in my shinobi," Tsunade replied firmly. "No doubt the remainder of the Rookie 9 and Team Guy will prevail, but remove all those 4 teams, take them out, and what do you have left, Lady Hokage?" At the names the enemy had used, Tsunade paled. The names were used only within the village, known only by those in the village. "How did you know to refer to them as that?" She couldn't stop herself from asking, even as the implications of his words were starting to become clear. Remove those 4 teams, and what indeed did she have left? She couldn't even name anyone off the top of her head. Anbu for sure, but there were only so many of them and they wouldn't be able to carry the weight of the entire village for long, if at all. Those 4 teams were comprised of the best in their fields, and without them all that was left was an older generation of shinobi that would be devastated by the loss of their children that had been a part of the Rookie 9 and Team Guy. I'm a lot closer to the village than you realize, Lady Hokage. Close enough to know that without those 4 teams, your lack of attention on the development of other younger teams will become your downfall. Without those 4 teams, the village hidden in the leaves will fall. Soon others will figure it out and act on it. You send those 4 teams on so many high-ranking missions that they're hardly ever in the village. The other shinobi have gotten lazy due to the lack of challenging missions, and should an attack come, like me, they couldn't stop it even if they wanted to. Who are you? Tsunade asked. His words were sinking in, the ghastly truth making her heart race and her mind cloud with shame. He was completely right. Where had she gone so wrong? The advantages of being a woman in this case meant that she was perfectly reasonable when the occasion called for it, and a kunai to the throat tended to make one very open-minded. While a male in her position would profusely deny any weakness in the village due to sheer ego, she could recognize and reason that there was indeed a huge weakness and it was all her fault. Luckily for you, an ally. I know of the Leaf's predicament because I was the first to see it. It angered me that you could allow it to happen. As a student of the third, I'd never believed you could be so careless. Further proof of my words can be seen in the Chunin exams. In the last one, how many Leaf genin made it to the 3rd round and got promoted? Tsunade was forced to conclude that while the Leaf genin were making it to the 3rd round, it was only because of the reputation they had garnered from the Rookie 9 and Team Guy. Ever since their involvement in the Chunin exams that had ended in the death of the 3rd, word had spread about the Leaf's uncanny ability to produce powerful genin. As a result, the battles were almost always won before the fight had even started due to fear, and as a further result, genin were not being promoted to Chunin because they weren't being given the opportunity to show the Hokage if they deserved to be promoted or not. Tsunade had waved away the genin senseis and their concern. They'd stated that while the genin had made it to the 3rd round, their skill level wasn't anywhere near the other genin from the other villages, and it was only a matter of time before they figured that out. Many had argued that the generation that had bred the Rookie 9 was a fluke, almost a freak occurrence. Ebisu in particular had begged the Hokage to pay more attention to the training of the younger genin, but she'd been too assured in their current position of power. They still had it, but if what this enemy, no ally, said was true, and the signs were now glaring at her proving more and more to be in the ally's favor, then they were in deep trouble. I figured I should point this out to you before it became irredeemable. The voice was different now, younger. I also realized that should this incident become public knowledge, I mean the fact that a mere genin was able to get into the Hokage's office and in a position to kill said Hokage, then the Leaf will fall for sure. That is not my goal. My goal is to protect the village, just as my grandfather did. The kunai was removed from her throat and she turned around to face the boy clad all in black and wearing a mask. As she watched, he removed the mask to reveal the grim face of Konohamaru Sarutobi. Yes, Konohamaru, it's best if this was kept secret. Tsunade agreed before she suddenly struck out and grabbed the unsuspecting boy's ear. Where the hell do you think you've been? She demanded, angry. Do you have any idea how many resources went into looking for you? It was like Naruto all over again. Asuma won't even talk to me. Tsunade had gotten to the emotional stage just as Nin had warned him. Nin had said that at this point he should become completely compliant. So he allowed the near-sobbing Hokage to pull him into a bone-crushing hug. She was frickin' bipolar just like Iruka-sensei. Can't breathe. Konohamaru gasped out just as the door banged open and the Anbu guards swarmed in, drawn by the commotion. Well, it's too late for you lot now. Tsunade snapped at the confused Anbu as she released a gasping Konohamaru from her hug of death. Since you're here anyway, one of you go fetch Asuma Sarutobi and another one of you useless morons go fetch Ebisu. The rest of you, get out and go patrol the building or something useful. She turned back to the nervous genin. He'd planned as far as alerting Tsunade to the threat, but not much further than that. You, sit. Konohamaru sat down immediately, not even worried that he hadn't even sat in a chair but had promptly fallen to the floor. Tsunade rolled her eyes before pointing at a chair. Once Konohamaru was seated in it, she narrowed her eyes. I'm grateful to your actions tonight, Konohamaru. Your concern for the village is something that would make your grandfather proud. Well done on seeing something that both Jiraiya and myself, two of the supposed legendary Sannin, did not, however. You've got some explaining to do. That tone was a dangerous one. She held up a hand before he could answer and went over to a seal on her wall. She pressed a hand to it and it glowed with chakra. We'll wait for everyone to arrive before you begin. While I'd like for your actions tonight to remain a secret, some people will have to be privy to that secret. Very soon pops and puffs of smoke filled the Hokage's office as grumpy and sleepy shinobi emerged from those clouds of smoke. Konohamaru gulped as he took in the people that were starting to appear. They were important people, very important. One of them however made him smile. Uncle Asuma. Konohamaru rushed to the Jonin who looked like he'd just crawled out of bed and probably had. He jumped on top of his startled uncle and hugged the life-giving air from his lungs. I missed you so much. You're not going to believe the time I've had. Konohamaru was lifted from Asuma's chest and plopped on the floor once again by a grumbling Shikamaru. Something about girls being troublesome. We just came back from a mission, this had better be worth the sleep I'll be losing over this. Ino threatened in a low deadly tone, narrowing her eyes at the boy she only knew by name and irritation since she'd had to look for him at one point in the previous 6 months, as had most of the shinobi in this room. Actually Ino, your team and the rest of Rookie 9 as well as Team Guy are going to be on vacation for a while. You can thank Konohamaru. He just earned you more sleeping time. Tsunade interrupted much to the confusion of the shinobi in the room which included the Rookie 9 and Team Guy, on a rare occasion of all of them being in the village at the same time, as well as the previous generation of the Ino Shika Cho trio, 3 Anbu ninja, one of them clearly the head of the Anbu division entirely and another was Ibiki, Hiyashi Hyuga, Tsu Minazuka, Shizune and Jiraiya. Why did you send that Anbu to get Asuma if he's right here? Konohamaru asked pointing at his uncle as though Tsunade couldn't see the still startled Jonin. Easy. Get them out of my hair. Now, start talking brat. Where the hell have you been? Tsunade replied. At this point Konohamaru's face scrunched up in confusion as he tried to remember something. Under his breath he began muttering, I was supposed to say something really important when first presented with that question. Oh man, what was it? But he'd been saying so many things at the time. Come on Konohamaru, think. Everyone in the room was waiting for the boy to figure out whatever it was that he'd gotten stuck on. To them it was a relatively simple question and it was only a raised hand from the Hokage that prevented anyone from shaking the boy in annoyance. Oh right, I think it was, a black cat crossed my path and I had to go the long way around. No, that wasn't it. The traffic was unbelievable. Nope, not that one either. I got stopped by a cute girl on the way here and she asked me to dance for her and I did. No, that was the third one, he said. Was it the one where I was helping the old lady cross the street and carry her groceries home for her? That was definitely one of them. As the muttered list grew, all eyes in the room turned sharply to Kakashi, who was smiling nervously and sweat dropping. Those excuses were starting to sound awfully familiar. Some god up there had it in for him. Aha, I got lost of the road of life. Konohamaru grinned at them as though he'd just accomplished some unimaginable feat. Hitaki. Tsunade said slowly, why is Konohamaru able to recite almost all of your excuses? Beats me. Kakashi shrugged, suddenly feeling very nervous. Ask him. Nin said that you of all people would appreciate that one. Konohamaru pouted. He said that as the copycat ninja you couldn't even claim copyrights. Another question for you, who's Nin? Tsunade asked before Kakashi could reply and escalate the situation. My sensei. He's the one I've been with the past 6 months and probably the reason why you couldn't find me. He's very good at hiding. Konohamaru replied with a sagely nod. How did you find him? Sasuke sneered. Konohamaru shrugged, he was just there. I don't think he was trying to hide just yet. He did tell me once that no matter how hard he tried there were 3 people that he knew that could always find him. Well, I'm glad the brat's back and all, and it sure would be interesting to hear his story, Lady Hokage, but what are most of us here for? I'm sure that the only one you really need at the moment is Sarutobi. The head of the Anbu asked quietly. Fair enough. Konohamaru, I'm sure you've noticed, is in my office at an ungodly hour, dressed all in black, and has a mask in his hands. As the Anbu head, what does that mean to you? Tsunade replied with a smile that Konohamaru knew meant the man was already in trouble no matter what answer he gave. He didn't. Asuma gasped suddenly, finding his voice. Oh yes, I did. Village security sucks. Be glad it was me and not the enemy. Konohamaru responded hotly. I don't get it. Ino yawned. Konohamaru sighed before moving quicker than anyone had thought the young genin capable of. Before Ino could finish her yawn, she found herself on her stomach, a knee to her back and a kunai to her throat. You really shouldn't drop your guard. Even in the Hokage's office, which I just broke into. This time it was Asuma who pulled him off and plopped him in the chair he'd been seated in a few moments ago. To be on the safe side, he wrapped chakra wire around his nephew so that he would stay in the chair. It's really sad, Uncle Asuma, that you think that'll hold me. The pout was back. It used to. Asuma muttered, hands itching for a cigarette but respecting the Hokage enough not to smoke in her office. Now, Konohamaru, to be. Focus on the little things, alright. You're getting off track here. Let's start with your mission. Asuma was kneeling in front of his nephew, taking charge of the situation since he'd finally wrapped his head around the idea that after 6 months the kid honestly and truly was standing in this room. Well, we had to find a teapot. As a genin of 2 years, that's insulting, I tell you. And not to mention the fact that I never got any time to train because Lady Hokage sent us on D-rank missions all the time. As a result, when our sensei was knocked unconscious, we were left completely exposed. We didn't know any jutsus other than the academy jutsus and the sexy no jutsu. We were completely helpless, forced to rely on the help of a stranger whom had no obligations to us and could essentially turn on us at any moment. It was the most terrifying experience of my life. Konohamaru's voice had turned hard, cold, yet sad. You've been a genin for 2 years already. Asuma breathed as though this information was a surprise to him. 2.5 now. Anyways, I watched as this stranger toyed with opponents that would ultimately kill me with no effort at all. There was no challenge in it for him. And even though they won't admit it, he even had to bail out Team 7. He says that if he hadn't been there, then none of us would have made it. He'd heard them planning the ambush and had decided to stay out of curiosity. He did admit that Team 7 had exceeded his expectations, but that Sasuke was lower than what he thought he'd be. It was like he'd heard of you guys a lot. Konohamaru was looking at the members of Team 7 now who'd stiffened at his words, not liking the weakness in them. Wait, so he was only in that bar because he knew that they were going to ambush Team 7. If that's true, then you guys owe this guy one. Ibiki whistled before clapping Kakashi on the back, jostling the Jonin. I wanted to get stronger too, but I knew that staying in Konoha wouldn't allow me to. Firstly, all I'd get is more lame D-rank missions that wasted my time I'd rather have spent training, and secondly, next to the rookie 9 and Team Guy, all other teams are invisible. I could have demanded something more till I was blue in the face, but you'd never have listened. I knew that it was a long shot and that it was more likely that he'd kill me before he accepted me as a student, but I had to learn from him. His skill. Konohamaru's eyes were wide and his voice was distant. It's crazy just how much he knows, just how good he is. On his own, he could take out the entire village hidden in the leaves and he wouldn't meet anyone that would be able to challenge him. That's absurd. How could no one be able to at least meet him in equal combat? We have 2 of the Sannin. Kurenai stated with a shake of her head. One time, he told me to hide, but he was really serious about it. I hid, but I could still see him. Orochimaru and his assistant, Kabuto, they arrived and tried to talk to Nin. I don't know what was said, but I know enough about body language to know that I don't think Orochimaru has ever tried to lick someone's butt as much as he was trying with Nin. I don't even think the other Sannin would recognize him if they ever saw him like that. Whatever he wanted though, he didn't get it. Nin refused and got angry when Orochimaru persisted. He took a single step forward and I swear Orochimaru cringed. The killing intent that was rolling off of Nin was. I've never felt so, it was terrible. Konohamaru shivered unconsciously at the memory. You're joking. Tsunade breathed and Konohamaru shook his head. So, getting back on track, I asked him to teach me and he agreed but only for 6 months. He's a busy guy and doesn't have the time to teach really. He's in high demand and he has a lot of enemies. He gets attacked a lot, especially when he's not trying to hide. So we moved around a lot. That's why I can't answer you on where we were. I don't know. We just kept moving. Konohamaru shrugged. Okay, so you were with this Nin guy the whole time. Who is Nin? Asuma asked. It's not his real name. He never uses his real name, ever. At least not around me. Everyone who ever spoke to him called him Nin, as his request, come to think of it. He said it was short for ninja. Konohamaru replied. You want to tell me that in 6 months with a guy you were never able to learn anything about him? Tsunade asked. He's extremely private. Worse than Kakashi. In the 6 months that I was with him I learned only 2 things for certain. 1, his eyes are chestnut in color and really expressive, which is probably why he covers them up, and 2, he knows a little of something of everything. If he thought for even a moment that he'd let something about himself slip, he was more petulant than a spoilt 2-year-old. It didn't matter that I never realized what he'd let slip on, he'd still get grumpy anyway. Konohamaru explained. What about things you learned just from simple observation? Just because things aren't said with words doesn't mean you can't tell anything at all. Kakashi asked. Nin had already given him a list of things he could and could not tell the other Leaf Ninja. He wasn't allowed to mention any of the techniques he wasn't good at, and he wasn't allowed to mention anything about his goals, the ones he'd let slip during that one conversation. There were other things, but those were the most likely to be asked directly. Sometimes, they'd call him the cage. Konohamaru had scrunched up his nose in a show of confusion. He knew that this statement would be exactly enough to distract even the most observant shinobi in the room, and as an added bonus it was entirely truthful. He'd even said the statement like it was a question. He knew that no one here actually thought of him as being capable of killing anyone in this room. They were still quite deluded by his previous skill level. He didn't exactly blame them, and he did have a long way to go, but it was ridiculous how easy they fell for the stupid genin act. Did he not just break into the village? The cage as in the leader of a village, like the Hokage? Asuma asked. No, the cage, as in the shadow. Jiraiya interrupted, speaking for the first time. You know something about this? Tsunade asked. Jiraiya sighed wearily. He looked up at the ceiling as he pinched the bridge of his nose, thinking. If that ninja he was with for the past 6 months was the cage, then we'll need to do a full evaluation of Konohamaru's skills. His memories will have to be documented, fully examined and analyzed. Everything he knows about this nin shinobi will have to be shared with everyone in this room. I don't trust the boy enough for him to be completely honest with us. Wah! I'm not allowing any Yamanaka in my head. Konohamaru protested with a growl. If he wanted to play it that way, then Konohamaru was out of here. Jiraiya being so quick thinking was not something he'd planned on. This could get out of hand very quickly. You can't be serious, Jiraiya. The damage that could cause to the boy is unthinkable. Inoichi also voiced his protests as he'd be the chosen Yamanaka, and he couldn't exactly say no to the Hokage. If you knew what I knew, then you'd feel the same way. Jiraiya growled. Orochimaru has every right to fear this guy. I still can't believe that a kid managed to stumble upon him and convince him to be a teacher. Private doesn't even begin to describe the guy, am I right, Konohamaru? Konohamaru nodded slowly, weary of the white-haired Sannin. I had the unfortunate honor of meeting with him once. I wish I hadn't. It was back when he was first making a name for himself, roughly 2.5 years ago. He approached me and wanted to know if I'd be willing to teach him. When I refused, he lost it. I don't know why though. It was like he was on the edge, teetering very close to madness. I wonder if he's reined it in. Konohamaru, could you do a henge of nin so that I know whether or not we're talking about the same guy? Jiraiya asked, turning to the genin. This was a fascinating story, even for him. Nin had effectively created two lives while he'd taught Konohamaru. One life was the cage and he had kept the genin so far away from it, it was like it didn't exist at all. Konohamaru nodded before closing his eyes in concentration. He was still bound to the chair but he could still manage an illusion. There wasn't even a puff of smoke as the genin's image wavered and was suddenly covered by another one that was familiar to 4 other people in the room. Only with this illusion Konohamaru left the sunglasses out so that Nin's eyes were visible. I don't think he's all that crazy anymore. Konohamaru commented, but his voice was that of Nin's and not his own. This henge technique, it's different from what's taught at the academy. Hiyashi stated confidently. Yes it is. Nin said it's the origin of henge. What we use today is a watered-down cookie-cutter version. It takes less chakra and most anyone could use it. The one I'm using takes far more chakra but it's more complete. However, this is still an illusion. Nin can make his transformations as real as an actual person. Konohamaru didn't add that with Nin's transformations, not even a Hyuga would see through it. That was on the do not tell list. Konohamaru figured that the best way to dissuade Jiraiya from trying to rummage around in his head was to appear to be as cooperative as possible. Konohamaru dropped the henge and waited for the next question, but when it came, it was thankfully not directed at him. What do you know about this cage guy? Tsunade pressed, looking from her Anbu to Jiraiya. In reply Jiraiya looked at the group of shinobi in the room. You've all heard some rumors about the guy, what have you heard? He asked. At first no one offered anything, but then once it started it was like the dam had broken. That he's just a rumor. No one's ever seen him. Sasuke scoffed. Rumors always start with a grain of truth, Sasuke, never forget that. Jiraiya reminded. That no one has ever faced him and lived. No one has ever been able to touch him because he moves too fast. You can't find him, but he'll always know if you want to hire him. He has no loyalties and his demands are always strange, not always money, and he never does the negotiations himself. He's one sick puppy that can't be killed. He's as crazy as a nutter. He's a demon worthy of the tailed beasts. There's a rather large bounty on his head, higher than anyone's has ever been, but there's no picture of him anywhere and no one has even attempted to claim it, not even using an imposter. No one had ever seen his face. He's an immortal. He's not human but a demon that was sent from the very pits of hell. He was born of the shadows, feeding from men's hatred. On and on the rumors were recited, growing more and more ridiculous until one very quietly muttered statement made everyone stop talking at once. Quote, He comes from the village hidden in the leaves. This was whispered very quietly by Kakashi. Almost like he didn't want to voice it at all. So you heard that one too, huh? Kakashi's statement was met with silence other than Jiraiya's grim reply. If it's true, then how did we manage to let such a powerful shinobi slip through our fingers? No one even knows how old this guy is. Kakashi turned to Konohamaru. Do you perhaps have an idea of how long he's been around? Konohamaru shook his head. For all I know, with all the jutsus he knows, he could be using a reverse aging one. Or he could be using a henge like Lady Tsunade's. He was lying, of course. He knew for a fact that Nin was young. Impossibly so for his level of skill. Perhaps being a little crazy helped out. The brat has a point. The Anbu head replied with a clear frown on his face just by his tone. Hey, why the hell was Konohamaru breaking into the Hokage's office in the first place? This was from Choji, and by the looks of things, he'd just figured that out. Was he really that asleep? But he'd effectively managed to divert the conversation away from Nin and towards a topic closer to home. That's actually a very good question. Kakashi mused, turned to the Hokage. All talks of the cage and whether or not he existed forgotten. Konohamaru was pointing out the lack of security. Something he's apparently noticed since before he left. This was stated very dryly and very pointedly at the Anbu and Jiraiya. He pointed out a major weakness in the village, one that could potentially bring down the entire village. Anyone care to tell me what it is? Keep in mind a genin saw it already. Tsunade challenged. Too much focus is placed on the rookie 9 and Team Guy. Konohamaru froze at that voice, but he was still bound to the chair, so he couldn't exactly cower. A path was made for a suddenly very angry special Jonin that looked like he'd just been kicked out of bed. Since he'd been summoned by an Anbu, he probably had. Konohamaru. Each and every part of his name was said slowly and through clenched teeth, prompting the genin to think that perhaps his sensei was only behaving by sheer force of will. Hi Ebisu sensei. I sure hope you're feeling better after that nasty bump you got on our last mission together. I did put that in my note, didn't I? Ebisu slammed his hands down on the armrests and leaned in real close to the genin's face, who was sweat dropping by now. Do you have any idea how much humiliation I've gone through in the last 6 months? Somehow this was said even more slowly and dangerously than how the fellow shinobi had said his name, causing Konohamaru to chuckle nervously. Does apologizing help? Apologizing? Do you really think that apologizing is going to make up for 6 months of taunting, mockery and utter isolation, all because I couldn't keep track of a single genin while nursing a concussion? No one seemed to remember that the genin in question just happened to be a one Konohamaru Sarutobi, and no one seemed to remember that he takes an awful lot after a certain other genin that went missing. Ebisu was on a roll now, and the more he spoke the worse Konohamaru and quite frankly the others in the room felt. A flash of a kunai was all it took for the chakra wire effectively keeping Konohamaru safe to be slashed away, and for Ebisu to have lifted the genin from the chair and was currently shaking the life out of him like a rag doll. And the worst part about it all, I don't know whether to kill you or to hug you. I'll make you a deal. You can hug me and kill a couple shadow clones of me. Konohamaru murmured in a voice that meant he was likely to throw up at any moment. As it was, his eyes were spinning, and for him, so was the room. He chuckled suddenly. Yeah, I missed you too, closet perv. He added with a fond smile. Apparently that was all it took for the wayward sensei to make up his mind, because Konohamaru once again found himself in a bone-crushing hug. Don't you ever do that ever again. From now on I'm chaining you to me during missions. You're on a short leash, Sarutobi, and as the future Hokage you should know better. And there he went again. The Hokage coughed to get their attention, and Ebisu shut up immediately, while Konohamaru gasped for precious air once again. Ebisu sensei, why don't you head on home and take Konohamaru as well? I'm sure his mother will be delighted to see him. Ebisu nodded curtly, his composure back in place, and he clamped a hand onto Konohamaru's shoulder, just in case. Before you go, however, you and your team, all of them, will be reporting to Training Ground 7 tomorrow. You'll be receiving new training regimens in preparation for the next Chunin exams in 1 month's time. You mean later today? Konohamaru corrected, glancing outside, noting the rising sun making everyone in the room inwardly groan and add a certain genin onto their shit list. As if it wasn't already there. Get going already. Tsunade barked, not at all pleased with the smart remark. Ebisu hurried the genin out the door with a final bow to the Hokage. Now, all of you, we have a lot of discussions to make. Starting with the cage and then moving on to village security and finally ending with the training of new teams. I hope you're all awake because this is going to take a while. We also have limited time. The Rookie 9 and Team Guy will be assigned to the training of Team Ebisu. You only have 1 month to get those brats up to speed and ready for the Chunin exams. Enko, Jiraiya and Genma will be joining you. Yes, Konohamaru was now number 1 on their shit list. Konohamaru knew that he was getting looks from the other shinobi, and he knew that he was being talked about, but everyone that knew about his return, or the circumstances of his return, were all still stuck in a meeting with the Hokage, which only further confused the shinobi population. The shinobi of Konoha were terrible gossips, and not many of them had missed the fact that all the important players were missing, which meant they were all in a meeting with the Hokage. That, coupled with the sudden return of Konohamaru Sarutobi, and one was left with a lot of room to get creative. However, nothing in the village hidden in the leaf could keep one very eager genin away from his current destination, Ichiraku Ramen. As soon as he entered, he noted another person already seated at the small booth. He nodded in silent greeting to his fellow ramen lover before ordering his own bowl. He happily slurped down the contents of 2 bowls before he even reacted to the person seated next to him. He liked the ramen booth for the strange privacy it afforded from outside eyes. He had no doubt that he'd be watched for the first few weeks of his return to ascertain that he was indeed still loyal to the village. Everything went exactly as planned. Konohamaru muttered under his breath knowing that he'd be heard. The man seated next to him nodded enthusiastically. "You're quite right, this is without argument the best ramen around." "Are you sure about what you want me to do?" Konohamaru asked with some difficulty. He'd wanted to frown but he had to keep a bright smile on his face. "Positive. Now I should really get going. Lots to buy today." With a cheerful wave and an even more cheerful tinkle as he placed his money on the counter, Nin-sensei left the ramen booth in complete disguise. Konohamaru noted that the man had knocked back 6 bowls. He smirked. Jip. Everyone loved Ichiraku ramen and he was no exception. Konohamaru sighed before paying his own bill with a bright smile and heading for training ground 7. He'd managed to convince Ebisu-sensei not to let him go home since at this early hour his mother would never let him leave again in time to make their appointment. His reunion with his mother would have to wait, no matter how much he actually wanted to see her. Konohamaru took a slight detour. Training ground 7 was right by the memorial stone. He would pay a visit to his grandfather first. He owed the old man that much. "Hey old man, I'm back. Sorry I've been gone so long, but I went to go train. I learned a lot of things but I also wasted a lot of time." "Ha ha ha, you should see my sensei. I think you'd like him. He's moody yet cheerful and extremely private but he's alright. I think something happened to him, you know, like Kakashi. It's too bad he doesn't come from Konoha." Konohamaru was quite content to chat away, not really caring whether the old man could hear him or not. He sure did miss the old man. Sensing that others were starting to arrive in training ground 7, Konohamaru said his goodbyes and headed over to the clearing just across the trees. He didn't sense his own team and wondered if they would be late or if the others were just early. Thinking more about it, Tsunade hadn't actually given a time. As he approached he was careful to make enough noise so that he wouldn't startle the occupants of the training ground, but not to make so much noise as to be obvious. He didn't actually want the others to know the extent of his training. He knew that 6 months was not enough time to make the improvements that he had and he didn't want to explain that he had no idea how he'd managed to learn as much as he had. Nin had mused that it might be a Sarutobi thing since his grandfather had been known for the sheer number of jutsus he'd mastered. Neither of them had dwelled on it, concentrating instead on how much he could learn in their limited time. "Glad you could make it, Konohamaru," Asuma stated sarcastically. "What's that supposed to mean?" Konohamaru asked with a childish pout. "Oh, we just weren't sure if you would actually show up or just run off again." Enko sneered with a sadistic grin. "No." Asuma disagreed with a frown and elbowing the other Jonin. "I just wasn't sure if your mother would have let you leave." "Huh. I got smart. I never went home. If I had she'd have chained me down and never let me see the light of another sunny day again." "Give me some credit, Uncle Asuma," Konohamaru replied with a grin. "Well, you all should have known that from the beginning. He's still wearing the same clothes." Kiba interrupted and the statement was punctuated with a bark from Akamaru. Konohamaru looked down at himself and noted that he was indeed still dressed all in black. That simply wouldn't do. With a wide grin he looked back up at Kiba and dropped the henge, revealing his previous outfit. "Respect the henge," the younger genin announced seriously while Kiba grew uncomfortable, not knowing how to respond to that. "That was a very good henge, Konohamaru. I didn't even know you were using one," a soft voice said politely. Konohamaru looked at the young Hyuga heiress. She didn't stutter anymore but she wasn't a pushover in a fight either. After Naruto left she became like a ninja possessed. Her Byakugan was on par with Neji's now and he, not wanting to be left behind, had trained just as vigorously. Nin-sensei is ace at henge. You should see his sexy no jutsu. I think it even beats, but Konohamaru didn't finish that sentence. He just couldn't. Saying Naruto's name hurt too damn much. It was just a name but it still reminded him of how the genin had simply vanished seemingly of his own free will. If that was true, if he hadn't been forced from the village, then Konohamaru didn't think he'd ever forgive the boy he saw as his brother. He'd left right when Konohamaru had needed him most, not even saying a word. Sure, he honored his missing brother by using his jutsu, wearing his colors, eating his favorite food, and acting just as annoying as he did, but that didn't mean a part of him wasn't still wishing he could find Naruto just so that he could punch him into the next year. Anyways, what's the plans for today? Konohamaru finished brightly, completely ignoring his last topic. It's our job to make sure you and your team are ready for the Chunin exams. We're going to have to see where you are first. Obviously your teammates will be behind, so you'll just have to be patient. Kurenai explained. Stop me if I'm wrong here, but isn't all of you being assigned to one team a little bit of overkill? Konohamaru asked with a confused frown. It may seem so, but the arrangement is only for the month. After the Chunin exams you'll go back to being taught by Ebisu-sensei, with a few lessons from the others occasionally, or if you ask nicely. Lady Hokage's aim is to make your team like the rest of us. Our training had been specifically geared towards making us very well-rounded shinobi, so we were trained in all areas that Konoha had access to. We know a little of everything in the Konoha shinobi world, with each of us specializing in what we're most efficient in. Hinata began. Yeah, since your team is probably going to be the only team entered in the Chunin exams this time around, it's important that you make it through to the finals, so you gotta be prepared for anything. It's our job to train you so that you can defend against anything they throw at you and dish out just as much. Kiba continued enthusiastically. After the Chunin exams it'll be our job to both continue our missions, but just not as many, and to take on other teams and train them. Why, you ask? Because the flaw in the village will only grow unless we strengthen the shinobi we have. Lady Hokage has already reassigned all the missions that would have been given to our teams this month, so that our full attention is on your team, as well as the other shinobi are being forced from their comfortable relaxation. Shino droned. We've already discussed how your training will be done for the next month. We don't usually train the sensei, but in this case we'll make an exception, so Ebisu will be with Anko, Jiraiya and Genma. All of those four will be hopping from one group to the other, helping where needed. Udon will be placed with Team Guy, with the tactical side of his training coming from Shikamaru. Moegi will be with Kurenai's team, as well as receive training from both Sakura and Ino. You, Konohamaru, have the honor of being wherever the hell we put you, with whoever we decide to put you with. For the moment, it'll be Team 7 and myself. Choji opted to sit this one out. Asuma explained while talking around the cigarette in his mouth. Konohamaru had been watching it bob and move with the words, the smoke trail making interesting patterns as it did so. These placements are only the focus placements. Obviously teamwork will be worked on and you will be swapping trainers, but for now we have to push the other two genin so that they're close to Konohamaru's level. Ibiki and the Anbu head did an estimate on his current level based on academy records and his chakra levels at the time of disappearance. It'll be tight, but I think we can make it. Jiraiya explained further. Konohamaru wondered what their estimation was. He didn't think it was accurate. Nin-sensei says the best way to learn something is if you have a lot of chakra to screw up enough times to get it right. He then said that the best way to get more chakra is to expand and develop the chakra networks, which is easier to do when you're younger, and he said the best way to do this, Konohamaru tried to explain so that everyone's lives would be easier this coming month, but Sasuke, who had just arrived, cut him off. We don't care what this Nin loser said. We're doing it our way. His loss. It would have saved so much time. Nin knew an awful lot of shortcuts, which naturally conflicted with Konohamaru's mantra. There were no shortcuts on the path to becoming Hokage. But the other shinobi had promised profusely that his way wasn't the shortcut, just the fast track. He'd also added that ninja complicated their own lives by doing things the long way. But since Sasuke was being such a sourpuss about it all, he'd just have to do it the hard way. He felt for his teammates, but he would not finish that sentence till Sasuke himself asked. It took a little over 20 minutes for everyone to arrive. Ebisu-sensei had probably said something to Udon and Moegi because they didn't attack him the moment they saw him. They weren't glaring either. Instead they looked a little confused as to why they suddenly found themselves training under the revered Rookie 9, Team Guy, Genma, only because he was a Jonin, Anko and the Sanin Jiraiya. It was quickly explained to them that Lady Tsunade was going to enter their team into the upcoming Chunin exams. Since their team had never been in the Chunin exams before, it was quite the shock for Udon and Moegi. Konohamaru thought that by now Ebisu-sensei was in a daze, his actions probably automatic. He wondered when the man was going to snap, and boy could he snap. But, if we're entering the Chunin exams, then why are we training with you? Moegi asked, looking to Kurenai, whom she was told was to be her sensei for the time being. The genin from other hidden villages are brutal. They've been training hard, taking things to the extremes in the hopes that they can bring honor to their village by taking down someone from the leaf. When word gets out that our team was trained specifically under them, here a thumb was jerked at the other shinobi, then we'll become the primary targets, the team to beat. They won't be kind, nor merciful, and they'll probably try to kill you every chance they get. You'll need the training, Moegi. Konohamaru explained, looking only at his female teammate. I'm sure it's not that dire. Kakashi said with that annoying grin of his, looking at both Moegi and Konohamaru, to which the latter shook his head. While traveling, Nin-sensei told me about some of the training the other villages are putting their genin through. Some of it's like the leaf, based upon sensei-pupil relations, and you don't push the pupil further than what they can achieve at that point in time. Some are nice, inventive but not as effective, and others are just plain harsh, leaving behind nothing more than a shell of a person, whose only thought is to take down any enemy that stands before them. I met one of those once. Konohamaru shivered. Nin-sensei killed him, said it was kinder. I personally didn't agree with him, but I wasn't about to argue with him. If what you say is true, then we're going to have major problems. I'll tell Tsunade to hold off the other teams. You three will just have to be sure to make it to the final round because you're the only team that'll be entering. Jiraiya stated firmly. After that, things got rolling pretty quickly. They all split up into 3 groups. Genma, Anko and Jiraiya would be going from each of the groups so that they could help out where needed and train Ebisu at the same time. If Konohamaru didn't know any better, he'd say his sensei looked a little offended but slightly elated at the same time. The young genin watched as Udon went with Team Guy, looking at Konohamaru as though the Sarutobi could actually save him from the tortures that were sure to follow, Shikamaru trailing behind them with a yawn. Moegi looked relieved to have Hinata at her side as Team Kurenai quickly left, Ino in tow, leaving Team 7, Asuma and Konohamaru in Training Ground 7. Sasuke suddenly attacked and Konohamaru just barely sprang out of the way, only to be charged at from the other side by a kunai-wielding Kakashi. Man, they were fast. And determined. But what were they so determined about? Sakura hung back a little as she watched the 3 males go at it. She hadn't expected Konohamaru to have been able to dodge Kakashi's strike. She didn't know that Nin was a lot faster and a lot more aggressive than what the other 2 were at the moment. Asuma watched silently as he puffed on his cigarette. It was his job to assess Konohamaru's skills from a spectator's point of view. So far the kid was exceeding their expectations. Konohamaru grit his teeth as he realized that he was going to have to allow some of those punches and kicks to hit. This was going to hurt, but he didn't want them to know everything, not yet. He saw the opportunity come when Sasuke went for a kick to sweep out his legs, but instead of jumping up and over, he jumped away and right into Kakashi. Jip. Sliding across the ground hurt a lot. Getting to his feet was a slow process. Kakashi blinked at him, seeming surprised to have landed the hit at all. His gaze was questioning and confused. Oh, that probably meant he was hardly fooled by Konohamaru's deception. Sasuke, on the other hand, was frowning in frustration. He hadn't landed a single hit, and that stung his pride. Sasuke grumbled under his breath and glared while he turned his attention away. After the hit had landed, Kakashi had given the signal to stop since Sakura had suggested a break. Kakashi was now sauntering over to Asuma, who was taking a long, thoughtful drag at his cigarette. Konohamaru concentrated on catching his breath, not that he was all that winded, but he wasn't completely unaffected by the match. Asuma and Kakashi were conversing very quietly to themselves and Konohamaru wondered if they were trying to figure out a deception. That would not do well for him. He was hardly as good as Sasuke or Sakura, but he was hardly your average genin either. He was Konohamaru Sarutobi, the grandson of the third Hokage, brother to Naruto Uzumaki, and he aimed to be the next Hokage, after finding his brother of course. He couldn't afford to be average. Konohamaru, why did you go sideways rather than up? Asuma asked loudly and rather suddenly, making the genin snap back to attention. Bad decision. Konohamaru supplied with a shrug. Are we going to get back to it? I'm still good. One punch isn't enough to keep me down. Hold on a minute, we're just checking something, okay? Asuma replied distantly as he returned his attention to the silver-haired Jonin. Konohamaru shrugged, walking over to Sakura who was watching Sasuke in fascination. Apparently him having a slight tantrum was something new. Hey Sakura, you didn't perhaps catch where the Chunin exams would be held this time around? I don't think I did. He asked, shuffling his feet slightly. It wasn't that he was nervous, just that he had a healthy dose of fear for the pink-haired shinobi. She was Tsunade's student after all, and she had a temper to match her enormous strength. Suna. They drew the short straw this time around. Sakura grinned like this was some private joke, and perhaps it was. Konohamaru smiled anyway, having got all that he'd wanted from the other, and turned to walk away. Suna wasn't so bad. Their alliance with the Leaf meant that they adopted a lot of the Leaf's customs, such as teaching methods and Chunin exam methods. What would Temari and Shikamaru come up with this time? It sure would be interesting. Konohamaru knew the Sand siblings far more personally than that first encounter so many years ago. In fact, Nin-sensei was a rather good friend of the Cage's. Friend wasn't really the word that Konohamaru would use, but it was close enough since they weren't exactly not friends. It was more like Nin-sensei owed Gaara a favor, and since he still owed it, he was effectively Gaara's bitch. But strangely enough, Nin-sensei never really seemed to mind all that much. He actually seemed to like spending time in Suna, and it was one of the few places he stayed in longer than a week and several times over. It made Konohamaru wonder if perhaps the other shinobi had originally come from Suna. However, missing Nin hardly spent an awful lot of time in the place they'd run away from, and with the cage of that place to boot. No, maybe not Suna then. Konohamaru was still deep in thought when suddenly threw a fireball at him. Well spat one. The Uchiha was only further peeved when the obviously distracted genin dodged the fireball by simply tilting to the left slightly, hardly expending a fraction of the energy it had taken to make the fireball in the first place. Are we getting back to fighting then? Konohamaru asked hopefully, returning to the land of the present. He got a grumble in reply and a glare from Sasuke. Konohamaru narrowed his eyes in thought before clasping his hands together in his own kind of seal. His hands blurred through the seals, not as fast as Sasuke would perhaps, but close enough. He spat a fireball straight at the grumbling Uchiha, who blinked in surprise for a mere second before using a replacement jutsu to get safely out of harm's way. Spoil sport. Konohamaru pouted at the stoic Uchiha, who didn't bother to retaliate. He simply turned his head away, staring expectantly at Kakashi and Asuma instead. The two older shinobi seemed to reach some sort of agreement because they broke away from each other and turned back to them. Nice fireball, Konohamaru, but could you put some power behind it? Kakashi commented as well as requested. I only wanted to singe his hair, not turn him into a crisp. I'm sure he'd have survived either way. Kakashi was doing that creepy one-eyed smile thing. Konohamaru slowly turned away from him, turning to face open air so that he could do the fire-style fireball jutsu technique again. He had noticed that Nin loved fire techniques even though it wasn't his natural affinity. Konohamaru got the idea that Nin was secretly proud of his fire-style jutsus because he'd had difficulty learning them. Fire was not his natural affinity. Performing the hand signs once again allowed Konohamaru to spit out a fireball smaller than his last one but much faster and with a more intense heat. Kakashi was forced to use a water jutsu to put it out when it exploded in the trees to stop it from causing further unnecessary damage. You know, most shinobi make fireballs bigger to get more power. Kakashi commented as he controlled the small jet of water. Even Sasuke did at first. Is there a question in that statement? Konohamaru asked, not really sure if there was one at all. Not really. He's just pointing out that your approach was unusual for a beginner. Did your sensei teach it to you that way? Asuma answered. No. But if you want to hit him, your attacks have to be fast. If not, you're just wasting chakra. Smaller things move faster and can be more concentrated, hence the higher temperature. Just how fast is this guy? Sakura asked, glancing at Sasuke. Faster than Naruto when trying to get to a free ramen special at Ichiraku Ramen on a first-come first-serve basis. Konohamaru was rather proud of his comparison, but it made the members of Team 7 stiffen and grow distant while Asuma sighed and looked away. Konohamaru sagged at the reaction. Yes, Naruto wasn't his favorite topic of discussion, but that didn't mean he wanted to never speak or hear about the other shinobi ever again. That was just so cruel. It was like they were ignoring him, even in his absence, and Konohamaru, no matter how angry he was at Naruto, just couldn't bring himself to do the very thing that Naruto had despised even if he wasn't around to see it. Team 7 was just going to have to get used to it. If this was the way this training was going to go, then they weren't going to get along very well. 6 months ago, he'd have been ecstatic at this chance, training with Team 7 and with the rest of the shinobi that had received the Hokage's undivided attention. Now, he was wondering when he could get out of here just so that he could go back to Ichiraku Ramen before going home to face his mother's wrath. A small voice whispered that he should have patience. It had hardly been a day, in fact it was probably lunchtime. There was still a whole month in which he could learn. It was up to him. He couldn't throw away this chance just because of a rocky start. After all, he couldn't expect them to welcome him with open arms either. Team 7 was notoriously difficult to work with, some saying that only Kakashi could manage to produce a team of jonin that were exactly like him in every way, stubbornly set on being utterly and annoyingly insufferable. Sakura wasn't a jonin yet, but she was good enough to be one. It wouldn't be long before she was promoted. Tsunade had tried to fill the gap on Team 7 with other shinobi, but it never worked. No one could stand to work with Sakura's temper and her temper-sized punches. They could tolerate Kakashi's Ika, even on missions, but they couldn't tolerate his utter tardiness and laziness. The least tolerated, even by his fangirls, was Sasuke. He was moody and testy to everyone, arrogant to most and completely unsociable to all except Kakashi and Sakura. He, more than the other two, was the main reason why no one stayed on Team 7 longer than a mission or two. Kakashi himself was reflecting on the last time Tsunade had loaded them with another shinobi. It hadn't gone well. The mission itself had been a success, but well, the shinobi that had accompanied them. Kakashi sighed as he trudged through the forest that was part of their latest mission. Behind him a muffled curse informed him that the whiplash of the tree branch he'd been holding away from himself but had let go when he'd walked clear had hit the annoyance behind him square in the face. A small pleasure, but not much. He was nothing more than a temporary replacement. Everyone knew that the last spot on Team 7 was reserved and not replaceable. A certain stubborn Uchiha made that widely known. If not by words but by the number of transfer requests and the record times they'd been asked for in. However, Kakashi had to say he hardly blamed the Uchiha. They seemed to find the most annoying and incompetent ninja in all of Konoha to saddle with Team 7, prompting said Team 7 to think their little group had become some sort of punishment for the rest of the shinobi. If you misbehaved, you were threatened with a shift on Team 7. No one died on the missions that they took, but usually the only people who ended up hurt were those substitutes, unless the substitutes happened to have originated from the rookie 9 or team guy. Another curse came from the idiot, and Sasuke suppressed the urge to smack him. He didn't feel like carrying the resulting idiot back to Konoha. They'd already completed the mission, so now it was the trip homeward. A part of Kakashi thought that with every loudmouth idiot they got saddled with, Tsunade was trying to replace Naruto, which resulting in him becoming increasingly short off with the Hokage. A fact she didn't miss but did not comment on. It was only after the blonde Uzumaki had literally disappeared off the face of the planet, and by literally they meant no shinobi was able to track him down. Not even Jiraiya could sniff something out. Only after things had settled down long enough for them to attempt their usual routine, did they all realize just how much Naruto had meant to them. As a result of Naruto's disappearance, a strange grimness had settled over the Rookie 9 and Team Guy, which in turn affected their sensei and in turn affected the rest of the shinobi. Any mention of Naruto and Uzumaki made every shinobi in hearing range sink into some sort of depression for unknown periods of time, so it was wisely a taboo subject, especially around a certain Uchiha. Another result had been jacked up training ordered by the Hokage. If someone was going to use Naruto as a weapon against the Leaf, then they had to be prepared. After all, Naruto would never leave willing. Someone just wanted it to look that way. He was far too dedicated to his village to just leave for no reason at all. They all agreed on that. Traditional training methods were abandoned in favor of creating the most well-rounded shinobi scene in years. All rookie genin were henceforth, after the failure of the mission, trained under Jiraiya, Kakashi, Asuma, Kurenai, Anko, Guy and even Tsunade herself. Others helped out here and there, but only for special lessons that the original sensei did not know much of. For obvious reasons, some were trained specially, such as Sakura becoming Tsunade's personal apprentice. As a result, Tsunade had created genin that had rivaled Danzo's root operatives, without the stunted emotional growth. Leaf gained a level of power never before seen, but that didn't make them arrogant. No, they got even more cautious, secretly suspicious of every mission given, since many turned out to be nothing more than ambushes, but never turning any down. No, Leaf maintained their friendly and peaceful attitude. They weren't looking for more power, just to be prepared. So the next part was no surprise. Every member of the original Team 7 froze. They'd all heard it, except for the idiot. The sound of a kunai blocking another. It was unmistakable. The three acted as one, leaving the idiot behind and jumping to the trees so that they could investigate. It had been another ambush attempt, but strangely that one had gone wrong. Two of the shinobi involved had begun to fight. After witnessing the ensuing fight, the little idiot genin had decided that Team 7 was not for him and had placed a transfer request the very same hour of their return. If Kakashi remembered correctly, he was now one of the better behaved shinobi, never putting a toe out of line. It seemed that their latest idiot for punishment just happened to be Asuma's nephew. Did that make a difference to Kakashi? Not by a single silver hair. It actually made him want to treat the kid more harshly than the others, but he wouldn't. Konohamaru was still the grandson of the third, and he respected the old man too much to make a mockery of his legacy. All right, enough self-pitying. We've got work to do. Asuma's gruff voice broke them out of their depressing thoughts, causing Sasuke to send a murderous glare at Konohamaru, the most he'd shown all day. Konohamaru sighed before being forced to do the next set of exercises, a ninjutsu spar on the lake. Not a very stimulating exercise. In fact, it was going to take more concentration to hold back yet display a constant level of skill than what it would be to actually do the task. After all, water on the lake was still. It wouldn't take all that much to remain standing on it. Yes, this month was going to be more of a test of his patience, unless they could teach him something he didn't know, but they believed him to be at a lower skill, so he doubted that was going to happen anytime soon. Oh well, that was entirely his own fault. Too bad. At least he was back home, with his team and on his way to achieving his goals. Things were looking up and he couldn't say that he didn't enjoy the direction they were going. Report. Everything seems to be congruent with Ibiki's estimation. Kakashi stated. His skill level is only slightly higher than the estimation, but as it was an estimation, it's not an immediate cause for worry. Is he ready? Tsunade's gaze was calculating as she watched the two shinobi in her office. For the Chunin exams, I'd say more than. Unless the other villages decide to play games. His teammates, however, might take some creativity. Asuma replied this time, fingers twitching for a cigarette he wasn't allowed to have just yet. Tsunade closed her eyes as she processed their words. So Konohamaru, you seem to take after the old man. However, we are concerned with his attachment to Nin. Asuma stated hesitantly. Elaborate, please. Every second sentence is stated about Nin, every order is argued with what Nin would rather have done. Every training exercise is met with frustration. It's like he's only doing this to appease us. His attachment to this other shinobi is, to say the least, troublesome. It's like he hasn't realized that he's not going back to Nin. Kakashi explained. Or he is and we just haven't realized it yet. Suon's tone had hardened. I don't think he's going to leave again. When he's not talking about Nin he's back to the Hokage speeches. Asuma supplied, hand twitching to the pocket with the cigarettes once more. The way he speaks, it's like any child speaks of their idol. He used to speak that way about Naruto, so I'm not inclined to think much of it. Either way, it's going to hit him hard when he realizes that Nin isn't coming here. That sounds like an issue we'll have to deal with when it comes. Tsunade sighed, almost shrugging, but Asuma would not appreciate the meaning behind a shrug from the Hokage. She honestly didn't have time for little Genin's feelings. They had to learn to grow up if they wanted to be shinobi. Alright brats. Get out of here and go get some sleep. You've got more training tomorrow. Tsunade dismissed the two with a wave of her hand, eyes traveling to the stack of paper teetering precariously in front of her. Why hadn't a cage, in all their brilliance, come up with a jutsu for paperwork? She fully suspected that the shadow clone jutsu had been a starting experiment that just took far too much chakra for the normal shinobi to do as many times as needed, and they did poof into clouds of quickly becoming non-existent smoke rather easily. With a sigh and a little help from some stolen sake she got to work. Are you ready for this? Ebisu-sensei asked, hand pushing up his glasses even as his voice flattened in pitch to show his seriousness. Moegi, Udon and Konohamaru along with the entire Rookie 9, Team Guy, Jiraiya and the Hokage with a few other Konoha shinobi were showing face in Suna for the much-anticipated Chunin exams. Most were only there for the first hour or two and would return to Konoha as soon as the introductions were over and as soon as it was politically polite to leave. Konoha needed to be protected at all times, even in times of the Chunin exams, especially the Chunin exams. These Chunin exams, however, were causing quite a stir. The main attraction, a single team from Konoha had been entered, only one and that team had been trained by Konoha's best. A smaller reason, more a rumor than a confirmation, was that one of those genin had trained under the cage. Do you have to ask? Honestly, Ebisu-sensei, I was born ready. Konohamaru proclaimed loudly. Ebisu sighed before handing them all their papers and pushing them towards the door. Now remember what we discussed, watch out of ambushes and sabotages. Today you represent Konoha, so you better not mess up, Konohamaru. As for myself, I'll be with the others. Ebisu was back to his sensei, no-nonsense voice. They were just about to enter when he spoke two more words very quietly and with some concern but with sincerity all the same. Good luck. Konohamaru pushed open the door to the registration room. They'd already registered, but this just happened to be the meeting room for the first round as well. Some villages just didn't want to reveal too much of their architecture to the other shinobi. Understandable really when one thought about what happened in Konoha and Orochimaru. The room they entered was filled with genin and not a single one of them spoke. Giving a quick glance around the room, Konohamaru was surprised to note that he in fact knew some of them. He didn't know them personally of course, but rather through association with Nin. Like there was the Shin clan shinobi who played the Ocarina in his jutsus, named Shi. She actually noticed the curious glance that Konohamaru sent him and smiled politely, also knowing Konohamaru by association. Hey Konohamaru, guess you made it after all. Nin said to look out for you. He greeted in a friendly tone that earned him some sneers. His announcement caused those who hadn't noticed that the Konoha team had arrived yet to look towards the door. Konohamaru suppressed a shiver when he noticed the Ryadoin brothers in one corner, their creepy eyes surveying the competition coolly. Together they were quite formidable, but alone, perhaps only Gensha was of worry since he was a taijutsu master. Their specialty, however, lay in their wooden puppet manipulation. Konohamaru nodded tightly to an anal genin from the village hidden in the stars, Sumeru. He was their best genin at the moment and his teammates were staring at him with awe. But as usual his nose was in the air and he was ignoring everyone around him. He did however, nod back at Konohamaru. He was surprised to see a still bandage-clad Isaribi. He didn't know what village she was representing but he wondered if she would be able to do well in this exam. She was highly water-based after all and they were in the middle of the desert. Konohamaru outright grinned at a smaller than usual boy named Rinmara. With him with the taller and infinitely less skilled Karshi. Konohamaru hoped that he didn't have to face Rinmara. His Kekkei Genkai would make things hard. Sasama glared at him from her spot near the back. So it looked like things were looking up for the Fuma clan. He was still sorry about what Orochimaru did to them and her cousin. Looked like everyone suffered because of that snake. Sasama, a tomboyish-looking kunoichi was always an absolute delight to be around, what with her winning personality and her great acting skills. Konohamaru still didn't know whether she'd save him from a sticky situation or happily dangle him off a cliff. He was leaning towards Cliff, but Nin saw something in her. He'd have to be careful of her clan's techniques though. They were dangerous if caught in. So, these are the dregs that Konoha has managed to send this year. Must be losing their touch if they only manage to send one team. And Iwa Nin sneered. Coming from a dead last village like yours. I wouldn't speak if I were you. I'm sure you still remember how our fourth Hokage kicked your butt. Konohamaru yelled back while Udon and Moegi tried to hold him back. He wasn't winning himself any friends but that wasn't his aim. He wanted to appear the loud-mouthed fool that was rash, that didn't think things through. If that is what they saw then good. It gave him a mask, so to speak. No one would know what he was truly capable of unless he showed them. His words made more than the Iwa Nin angry and Konohamaru mentally winced. It seemed that Nin-sensei was right. Everyone was truly gunning for Konoha. So, which one of you rats was trained by the cage? This was asked very quietly by Akumo Genin. Who says one of us was? Moegi asked sticking out her tongue. She was deathly afraid that Konohamaru would say something stupid and stick his foot into it. She wanted to survive these exams thank you very much. URG, it's only a rumor then. Nothing to sweat about. Besides these Konoha twerps don't look like any sort of threat to me. I don't know what my sensei was whimpering about. I dare you to say that again. Konohamaru yelled while Udon kept a desperate hold on his scarf. Alright, settle down. I don't have time for idiotic and immature games, especially you Konohamaru. Kankuro announced loudly as he entered the room. Ah come on. Why does everyone assume that I'm the troublemaker? Konohamaru replied in a whiny voice. Because you are, now shut up and pay attention. The puppet master snapped, getting everyone's attention. There were other sand shinobi in the room but the focus was on Kankuro. He appeared to be the proctor for this exam. My name is Kankuro. I am one of Sand's best shinobi and I'm also one of their least tolerant. I'm not here to wipe your sniveling noses. I'm simply here to inform you of the rules. I don't want to hear any whining or bitching about this exam, purely because I do not care. So don't even bother. If you don't hack it, you don't hack it. Try again next time, if you can. Kankuro's tone was brief, his face a scowl daring anyone to contradict him. Konohamaru knew firsthand just how impatient Kankuro was with kids so he didn't say a word. Pay attention, I don't want to have to repeat myself and there are a lot of rules. For the first stage of the Chunin exams each team will be led into a different room. Once inside that room, it'll be your job to get to the other side where a scroll is situated. How you get across is entirely up to you, however if a teammate is injured you'll be disqualified. If you lie about an injury, you'll die. Simple as that so don't even think about it. If anything inside the room is damaged more than the usual ninja tool against ninja tool wear and tear, you lose points for every contraption that you break. You only have 10 points to start with. The amount of points you'll lose is dependent on what you break. Each team will gain 5 additional points if they can get to the other side without using chakra. Each team will lose 8 points for every jutsu that they use. For the team that manages to make it through the room without even drawing a weapon, you'll get 15 points. If a team completes the exam in under a minute, they'll get 3 extra points. If a team finishes the exam with anything less than 8 points, they're disqualified. Kankuro's tone completely devoid of emotion, making it really hard to keep concentrating on him. However, these rules were really important, so Konohamaru had no choice. You can choose whether all 3 of you are going into the room, or if only 1 or 2. Keep in mind that once a team enters the room they cannot exit, and should you have chosen to leave another teammate behind, they cannot enter. You cannot trade places and you cannot assist in any way from the outside. Ignoring any of these conditions will get you disqualified. However, all 3 of you need to have the scroll. Kankuro sounded like he was finished, and everyone in the room sure hoped that he was, because they were all having a really hard time keeping up with the current restrictions. You'll have 10 minutes to discuss your strategy. For now, leave through that door. Oh, and one more thing, you have an hour time limit once you enter the room. Konohamaru tapped his teammates on the shoulder before dashing to the door before anyone else had even realized what Kankuro had said. I'm going in alone, Konohamaru immediately stated when Moegi and Udon caught up. It was hard to get lost after leaving the other room. They'd entered what appeared to be a hallway that seemed to stretch out forever. There were doors along each side, spaced equally apart. Were these the rooms they were to enter? Konohamaru, stop at the 50th door you pass. Kankuro yelled after them. He'd already counted out about 25. That's hardly fair, Konohamaru. Moegi pouted. Besides, how are you going to keep up with all the rules and get the scroll? Udon asked with a sniff. We don't know enough about what's in the room for us to risk it. Konohamaru argued back. If there's only one of us, then it'll be easier to get from one end of the room to the other end. Hold on, Konohamaru. What you're saying is correct, but we still need to factor in all the rules. Udon urged. We don't have time for that. Konohamaru argued. Remember what Jiraiya-sensei said, always have a plan. Moegi stated firmly. Bad habits got a ninja killed. Nin said that all the time, too much sometimes, but he had a point. Rushing into this was not going to get them through the challenge. Konohamaru had been keeping track of the doors they had passed and stopped when he reached the 50th door, as Kankuro had instructed. Alright, which rule was the most important? Konohamaru asked just before Kankuro announced that their 10 minutes started now, and if at least one of them had not entered the room, then by the time the 10 minutes were up they were disqualified. Easy, all 3 of us have to have the scroll. Udon stated confidently. But that would completely disregard the previous set of conditions where all 3 of us don't have to be inside the room. Moegi pointed out. So then I'd say it's safe to presume that no matter what, all 3 of us have to enter that room. Konohamaru had lowered his voice. The doors were not all that far apart and every team had stopped at a door. 50 doors on each side made it safe to assume that roughly 100 teams were entered into the Chunin exams. Only one of them was from Konoha. They couldn't afford to mess up. There wasn't anything mentioned about using chakra before we enter the room. Udon pointed out. Do you know any jutsus that will help out here? I'm not exactly a Hyuga. Konohamaru replied, thinking on all the jutsus he himself knew. None that would help came to mind. Both his teammates shook their head. Alright, then let's discuss the rules that focus on inside the room. Which one would be the most important there? I'd say the chakra one. Konohamaru continued. Yes, the point system seems to be ridiculously set against the use of chakra. While ninja tools aren't expressly forbidden, points are awarded if we don't use them at all. Moegi muttered. So it's like extra credit. You won't lose anything for not doing it, but you'll gain everything by doing it. I say we use the ninja tools since we're not losing anything if we do. If we make it through with the 10 original points, then it'll be fine. We can't miss something that was hardly ours to begin with. She was referring to the extra points. They were guaranteed 10 points right from the start and they needed 8 to pass the test. So breaking the rules would be foolish, since breaking even one would result in instant disqualification, since there was no way to make it back out with 8 points again, unless they didn't draw any ninja tools. That meant they couldn't even take any out, or else they wouldn't get the extra points. Aiming to achieve all the bonus points was also foolish, since they'd be more likely to rush into things and make a mistake, so those 3 extra points were out of the question should they finish in under a minute. There are no shortcuts on the road to Hokage. Konohamaru muttered. That statement was enough to let the other two know that Konohamaru had completely disregarded all and any ideas that focused on gaining the extra points. So that was 5 points for not using chakra, 15 for not even drawing a weapon, and 3 for finishing in under a minute. 8 points lost for every jutsu we use. Looks like we're going to get those 5 points whether we tried or not. Udon clarified while the other two nodded. No injuries. We get disqualified if even one of us had an injury. Moegi reminded. Disqualified and a loss of points meant the same thing when one thought about it. This test was one twisted one. Udon highly suspected Anko and Shikamaru had had a party on this one. So, all of us have to go in that room even if they didn't say that. No one is allowed to get injured. We can't use chakra, and we've decided that if we have to, we'll use ninja tools. Did I miss anything? Konohamaru summarized. Yes, we're not allowed to break anything. Udon added in a tone that suggested he was honestly sick of the rules. There were just so many, and they were so ridiculous. At this stage all Konohamaru wanted to do was walk in there, grab the scroll and walk out again. Looking towards the other teams, he saw that some were near nervous breakdowns. He smirked. Looked like they were having trouble seeing through all the rules. The biggest factor for Konohamaru and his team now, because the complete unknown behind that door. You have 1 minute left. Konkuro's voice boomed. I suppose we should enter. He did say that if we were in the room by the time the 10 minutes were up then we were disqualified. Moegi suggested. The boys nodded while Konohamaru put his hand on door handle. Taking a deep breath, he pulled on the handle and pushed it open. He didn't enter immediately but rather exercised caution before entering. He didn't want to get skewered before he even crossed the doorway. When nothing happened, they pressed forwards. All 3 entered the room. The moment the door closed, they were plunged in darkness. No one moved. Konohamaru said sharply, and instantly. Was this a genjutsu? Was breaking out of one considered using one's chakra? There were several ways to break out of a genjutsu. 1. Disrupt your own flow of chakra. If that didn't work, then 2. Get someone else to disrupt it for you. 3. Pain. Pain meant injury, so that was not allowed. Option 1 and 2 could be considered using chakra. Konkuro hadn't been very specific about that. In fact, was breaking a finger the type of injury that would get them disqualified? He'd been far too vague. Shit. No one had thought to ask when they had the chance, and they couldn't go back out, not now that they had entered the room already. Plus they had only had a minute of their 10 minutes of deliberation left. There wouldn't have been time to ask anything anyway. No way to break the genjutsu meant that it was a trap, meant to confuse. Backtracking his way back to the door, Konohamaru spread his fingers until he found the wall. This was a lot harder without chakra. He was glad he'd decided on the path of a shinobi rather than a civilian. Fumbling along the wall at around the average height he suspected it to be, Konohamaru flicked a switch as his fingers brushed against it. The blinding light that ensued was enough to cause all 3 of them to cover their eyes. Had this been a real battle situation, they'd have been killed instantly. Rather, they'd have been killed the moment they walked through the door. Congratulations, Team Ebisu. Konoha will be proud. You passed with all your points as well as all the extra points. Konohamaru lowered his hand to stare in amazement at the sand shinobi sitting at a table with a scroll resting in the center. Part of your completion of the test involves me explaining the test to you. Had only 1 or 2 of you entered, those members would have been placed under a genjutsu. Had they adhered to the rules, they'd have realized that they could not successfully break out of the genjutsu, forcing them to wait for it to wear off, which would only have happened after 1 hour, disqualifying them in any case. If they had tried to break out of the genjutsu, they would have lost more points than they could spare. The rules and restrictions were placed there only to confuse you into a state of inaction or overreaction. The focus of the exam was your teammates. Had any of you allowed only 1 person to enter the room, then that is like sacrificing a fellow shinobi. Had only 2 of you entered the room, then you'd be leaving a teammate behind. Both of these scenarios are not ideal. Therefore, by entering the room as a team, and figuring out that a genjutsu that could not be broken out of was in fact not a genjutsu at all, you pass. And let's not forget that it's good training. Sometimes clients have ridiculous requests. Kankuro added, walking into the room. Sometimes you don't get any information about a mission, only an objective and its location. In case you didn't notice, I never said anything about getting back out of the room. All I said was that you had to get to the scroll. I thought you were overseeing the exam. Udon tilted his head slightly in confusion as he took in the painted face of the sand shinobi. Please, I was the only one that could remember the exact order those stupid rules had to be given in. Kankuro snorted. He then turned to Konohamaru. Your sensei wanted me to give you this. He dug around in his uniform before producing a single sky blue feather. He handed it to Konohamaru as though he thought it would explode. The feather itself had an orange dot on it, giving the whole thing an entirely unreal appearance. Konohamaru took the feather with a smile. Would you mind if I asked what it was? Kankuro asked, his interest poorly disguised. It's a reminder. He's telling me that I'd better not screw up since I'm representing him as well as Konoha. He's also reminding me that it would be foolish to underestimate my opponents. After all, Konohamaru raised the feather and took aim. Anything can be a weapon. With a flick of his wrist, the chakra-charged feather flew across the room and embedded itself into the wood on the desk, just in front of the scroll. So therefore any opponent could kill me.